many of you joining us. So welcome everyone to this full morning of training on applying the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. This training is truly a very collaborative effort driven by that demand that we've seen globally for more information and support on implementing the IFRS standards. So we'd like to say a big thank you to all our collaborators on this programme. So firstly, to the Securities Industry Development Corporation for hosting us at today's session, to the IFRS Foundation for participating and co-facilitating this training with us, and of course to the IFC for their generous support to this programme, as well as Bloomberg Philanthropies. And finally, of course, thank you to all of you for joining us here today as well and taking that time to progress your learning on this topic. We do appreciate that as well. So to get us started today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tengku Zarina Tengku Cik, who is CEO of the Securities Industry Development Corporation. So Tengku will be giving us some brief opening remarks. So the floor is yours, Tengku, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Good afternoon, everyone. And I see that the numbers are going up, but we know we have got about 300 plus registered for this event. So hopefully we can see more of them coming in as we speak. So on behalf of the Securities Industry Development Corporation, SIDC, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this online workshop on the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. This event is co-organized with the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges, UNSSE, International Finance Corporation, IFSC, and the IFRS Sustainability Capacity Building Program. So a warm thank you to our partners for bringing this important initiative together. And to the speakers today, thank you so much for your time. Now, to the upcoming 300 plus participants joining us from Malaysia and beyond, thank you for sparing your time to learn. I was checking the registration list just this morning, and it's wonderful to see many familiar names from the SIDC Alumni Network, as well as new participants from the international markets. To those joining us for the first time, warm welcome to the SIDC community. So ladies and gentlemen, as sustainability becomes central to business practices worldwide, Malaysia has taken a critical step forward with the launch of the National Sustainability Reporting Framework, NSRF, on 24th September 2024. So this framework was issued by the Advisory Committee on Sustainability Reporting, ACSR, chaired by the Securities Commission Malaysia. So the NSRF outlines Malaysia's approach and a roadmap in adopting the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. So this milestone aligns us with more than 30 jurisdictions globally that have adopted or are preparing to use the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. And I'm sure there are some of you who are also from these jurisdictions other than Malaysia. Now, this workshop today is designed to equip you with the knowledge and tools needed to implement and comply with the new reporting requirements. As a refresher to my Malaysian colleagues attending today, you would already know that the NSRF implementation will follow a phased approach targeting 3 groups of companies. The group 1 are the main market listed issuers with market capitalization of 2 billion and above are required to start reporting in accordance with the ISSB standards for financial years ending on or after 31st December 25. So group 2 are the other main market listed issuers other than the numbers in group 1. They are expected to start financial year 31st December 26, and group 3 are the ACE market listed issuers and non-listed companies with annual revenue of 2 billion and above to start reporting from 31st December 27. So the NSRF takes a climate first approach, emphasizing the importance of addressing climate related risk and opportunities as a priority. So for those from different jurisdictions, I would gather you already know your own respective implementation timelines in your respective jurisdictions. Now, SIDC's role in this journey, at SIDC being the learning and development arm of the Securities Commission Malaysia, we take pride in being a one-stop education for capital market. Sustainability is one of our key subject pillars, especially in sustainable finance and investments, as well as sustainability reporting. Our work with the NSRF under the PACE initiative, that is promote, align, capacity build, and educate, ensures that businesses and professionals are equipped to meet the evolving demands of sustainability. Many of you would have already experienced this through our programs like the Certified Capital Market Professional in Sustainable and Responsible Investment, CCMP-SRI, Sustainability Reporting Masterclasses, and even GRI reporting recently. And so I encourage you to continue your learning journey with us. Next year, working closely with the ACSR and Bursa, we will either source or curate more skill building programs to help you navigate the sustainability journey for your organization. So do watch the space. For those who have taken part in our programs and certifications, thank you for your commitment to continuous learning in this dynamic field. I invite you to continue leveraging on SIDC as your partner in this accessibility journey, even for our new participants from the international jurisdictions. So in conclusion, we are very fortunate today to have the esteemed speakers from the UNSSE and IFRS Foundation to share their knowledge and insights. So I want to thank Ms. Louise Guthrie, Senior Specialist UNSSE, Ms. Fiona Quinlan Wells, Training Officer UNSSE, Ms. Bella Cheng, Capacity Building Specialist IFRS Foundation, and Mr. Robert Swiatowski, Partnership Manager, Capacity Building IFRS Foundation. And I know that Kate Lazarus has just joined us as well. So with these experts who have been involved, I understand that they are involved actively in the development of the sustainability disclosure standards itself. I encourage you to actively engage, ask questions, and take advantage of this opportunity to learn and network. Because your engagement is very important to improve the quality of the disclosures and promoting transparency and accountability in our markets. Thank you very much. I'll pass back to you, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Tengku, for that excellent context setting to the session. And it's fantastic, firstly, to hear about all of the very proactive support and engagement you're already giving the market. So we hope we can help to complement that with today's session. So brilliant. So thank you for that. So I'll now move us along to Kate. So as we've mentioned, Kate Lazarus has kindly joined us today from the IFC. Kate is the Senior ESG Advisory Lead for Asia Pacific with the IFC. So I'll pass over to Kate now to give a few brief remarks from the IFC perspective as well. So over to you, Kate. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Fiona. And hello to everyone. Good afternoon. So it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to this important session on the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. As mentioned, my name is Kate Lazarus, and I'm leading the International Finance Corporation, IFC's ESG advisory program across Asia Pacific, where we provide guidance and advice to the private sector on ESG and sustainability, and to market intermediaries such as stock exchanges, regulators, institutes of directors, and associations to really move markets in this direction. So on behalf of IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group, I'd like to extend our appreciation to our distinguished hosts from the Securities Industry Development Corporation, SIDC, Malaysia, and in particular to CEO Tengku Zarina Tengku Shik. Thank you very much for your support in making this event possible, which is invaluable. IFC is pleased to have established a strong presence in Malaysia last year to foster greater sustainable, resilient, and inclusive economic growth, and we look forward to working together. So today's training is a result of the partnership between IFC, the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, and the IFRS Foundation globally, which is aimed at strengthening sustainable capital markets by enhancing sustainability and climate reporting in emerging markets and developing economies. Our joint efforts will ensure that these economies are not left behind in the global shift towards sustainable finance. And to this end, the training focuses on IFRS Sustainability Disclosure S1, the general disclosures, and S2, climate-related disclosures, which were launched in June 2023 by the ISSB of the IFRS Foundation. So IFRS S1 provides a set of disclosure requirements designed to enable companies to communicate to investors about the sustainability-related risks and opportunities they face over the short, medium, and long term. And IFRS S2 sets out specific climate-related disclosures and is designed to be used with IFRS S1. Over the past year, there's have been a significant surge in demand for sound ESG data and disclosures. The launch of the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards in 2023 brought a long-anticipated convergence of sustainability disclosure frameworks. The new standards reflect increased sustainability and climate reporting requirements. They urge regulators and stock exchanges globally to adapt their listing requirements and reporting guidelines to meet investors' demand for sound ESG data. The standards also affect supply chain companies in emerging markets and developing economies who need to provide reliable, comprehensive, and verifiable sustainability and climate disclosures. We at IFC are pleased to partner with various regulators across Asia Pacific, including partnerships such as the Bangladesh Bank, for the development of their own guidelines on sustainability and climate-related financial disclosures, and SFR Circular Number 6, which is they're the first central bank in South Asia and really a trailblazer to adopt these standards focused on IFRS S1 and S2. And working with other financial regulators, such as the Financial Regulatory Commission in Mongolia, the Seban and NEPSE in Nepal, and in many other jurisdictions. We provide regular trainings across the region and guidance to a wide range of stakeholders, and thus then provide in-depth advisory to financial intermediaries and real sector clients to align with either the updated national standards or international standards, depending on the situation in their jurisdiction. So lastly, we'd like to introduce the IFC Beyond the Balance Sheet platform. It's a valuable resource. You can find the link in the chat and in the training materials. This platform offers a step-by-step toolkit for preparing reports that align with IFRS and other global standards. Exciting upcoming products include a self-assessment tool, which allows companies to benchmark their practices against these standards, an e-learning course on sustainability and climate disclosure essentials, which will cover key ESG reporting topics with real-world examples and more. These resources are designed to make sustainable finance accessible, practical, and aligned with global frameworks. We continuously update the platform, so we encourage you to explore its resources regularly to meet the evolving standards and support effective disclosure practices. We believe today's session will strengthen your understanding of these standards and support your work in advancing sustainable finance. We're committed to supporting companies and regulators in your countries, and we see this as an opportunity for meaningful collaboration. Please feel free to outreach if you need support across Asia Pacific. I'd like to thank all of the organizers and all of the efforts today, and please enjoy your learning. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that, Kate, and for all of that work that you do in the region, which I'm sure is greatly appreciated in terms of that capacity building support as well. So thank you so much for that. Excellent. So with that now moves us into a few practical points before we get started with the main body of the training session. So firstly, you will have noted already that all participants are on mute. However, we would really encourage you to make use of the functionality within Zoom to interact with us in the session. So please use the chat function to introduce yourself or make any comments as we move along. And if you have any questions for the team, please ensure that you put those in the Q&A box on the bottom toolbar. That will be easier for us to track than being in the chat, and just make sure we're able to answer each of those questions. So we really encourage you to, as we say, share your questions with us, but just make sure to put those through in the Q&A so that the team can respond to them accordingly. So as you know, today we have 3.5 hours of live training. We also have an optional follow-on homework exercise, which we'll explain a little bit more to you later on. As we've said, we'll be doing live question and answer throughout. We'll also be doing some interactive exercises and activities using Menti, and as well as the poll function in Zoom. So we really encourage you to engage with those exercises within the session as well. It really helps us, obviously, to get the most out of the training if we get good participation in those. So very much encourage you to take those opportunities to reflect through the exercises as we move through the training. You will also receive a certificate for joining us live at today's training session. To do so, you'll need to complete a feedback survey, which we'll share with you at the end of the session. So we'll tell you more about that towards the end of the session. And I should also mention as well that towards the end of the session, Kaim from the SIDC team will also be giving a brief presentation after the training around some of the support services and programs that SIDC can offer you as well. So please make sure you stay to the end of the session to hear about those services from SIDC as well. So we also, I think, have already mentioned some of the names, but just to introduce the speakers who'll be joining you today. So I'm Fiona from the SSC training team, and I'm joined by my colleague Lois Guthrie, who is our senior specialist as well. From the IFRS Foundation, we're very pleased to be joined by Bella Cheng and Robert Swiatowski as well, from the capacity building team. So you're in very good hands in terms of the technical contributors to today's session. I hope you'll agree. So in terms of our learning objectives from today's training, so there's two real key areas that we want to progress. So firstly, we want to help you to understand the ISSB standards. And secondly, we want to help you to understand how you can use the ISSB standards and to implement them. So really helping you to identify what steps you can take to develop a disclosure plan to get started with applying the ISSB standards. And so we kind of break that down really into a number of training modules to help achieve those objectives, which you can see on the screen there. So these kind of 4 areas of prepare, align, implement, and communicate are designed to really take this step by step in terms of approach. So firstly, in prepare, we'll be thinking about the purpose of sustainability related reporting. We'll be thinking about the reporting landscape as it stands and how it's evolving, and how the IFRS standards are really informing a global baseline for reporting. We'll then move into our align module, which is all around understanding the direction and applying the standards. So thinking about what gaps you may have in your existing reporting and what additional disclosures you may need to plan for. Within implement, we'll then be thinking about your practices and systems. So how do you identify sustainability related risks and opportunities? How do you evaluate them, and how do you integrate them into your reporting? And then we'll finish with communicate. So looking around the final format of your actual disclosures. So where to report, how to do so efficiently and with confidence. And so to work through those 4 modules there, we have an agenda as I've shared on the screen here. So we'll be tackling the first 2 modules predominantly to start with. We'll take a short break in the middle just to give ourselves an opportunity to refresh. And then we'll move into the other content areas at the end. So as I've said, we'll have some exercises throughout that, but feel free to continue to ask your questions in the Q&A module as well throughout. The rest of the team who are not speaking will do their best to get back to you on those questions in the background as well. So Lois will be sharing the link in the chat with you as well, but just to say that all of the training materials from today's session, including today's slide presentation, the homework exercise, and after the session, the recording as well, will all be posted to the event web page for this session. So you'll be able to go to that page to find all of these materials to review in your own time as well. Thanks for sharing that, Lois. And then also, as I've mentioned already, there will be a short optional homework exercise which you can find on the web page. The homework assignment really follows the structure of the exercises that we're starting on today. So we're trying to get you started with that disclosure plan really through the homework assignment. So just to say, there's no need to submit the homework to us. It's entirely optional. And it's really just for your own learning and to build experience. But we hope it can be a useful tool to help you to start your conversations internally and build your plans. And just to mention a few of the other resources that you'll be able to find on our webpage. Links to all of these will be available in the slide handout. So we have a number of guidance resources at the SSE that can really support you to develop your plans around sustainability related financial reporting, but also on other aspects such as transition plans and in particular climate metrics as well. To get us started, I think it's the time to hear from you all firstly about your reasons for joining us here today. So we're going to be using Menti for an exercise now. So the link will just be shared very shortly with you in the chat to access Menti. So if you follow that link, it will take you to the page where we have this first question around why you joined us today and a few keywords there. Great. So I think it's, I'll just share that link with you. There we go. So if you click on that link to Menti there, that will take you to the questions. So I will just share the screen now so that you can see the questions as well. Okay, so the other options that you may like to use to join us as well in Menti is also to use that QR code that you can see on the screen there, and also to you can also navigate to menti.com at the top of the screen and enter that code at the top as well if you prefer. Great, so I see some responses coming in already to that question around why we joined today, and just sharing a few key words. So thanks everyone for those. So I see loads of words there, but I see compliance, knowledge, learning, smooth implementation, importance, global trends, advancement, audit. So loads of really great drivers for joining us, I think, and I hope we'll be able to support you in a lot of those different areas. So that was a great question just to get us started and check we can all access Menti firstly. So thanks everyone for joining us there. So in the interest of time, I'll move us along to the next Menti question. Don't worry, there'll be lots more opportunities to participate. So I'll just switch the Menti share now to the next question, if that's okay. So our next question for you all is just also to let us know your kind of current level of understanding on these different topics. So you can use the slider bar on the screen there to let us know where you think you're at currently in terms of your current comfort on these different areas around explaining to your team what the ISSB is, using the ISSB standards, and also developing a sustainability reporting strategy. So you have not comfortable at all on the left and very comfortable on the right-hand side. So just take a second to let us know where you think you're at today in your current understanding. And it's useful just to have that baseline and know where everyone's at today. Great. I see lots of people have participated in that already. So generally, we're coming out sort of low to middle, perhaps, in our current levels of comfort, which is totally understandable. A little bit of a range, of course, but yeah, most of you sitting sort of somewhere between lower end of comfort and the medium level. So that's totally understandable, of course, and great to have you with us today to hopefully help you to improve on that. So that's brilliant. Thanks, everyone, for sharing. So I'll take us back to the slide presentation just now, but we will be returning to Menti later in the session. So I recommend keeping that window open in the background as well to allow you to return to Menti later. With that, that moves us on then to starting the main presentation of the training content. So before I do so, I just have a very brief disclaimer to share with you all, which I'll just leave you to review for a moment. But really just what we want to be clear with in this disclaimer is how we're going to be using examples in the session today. So we'll be talking about some particular company examples, and we just want to clarify that these are really just to add colour to what we're talking about. Sometimes, of course, it can help to see a real example to put it into practice. However, we'd like to be clear that the examples we're sharing shouldn't necessarily be seen as the best or perhaps the right way to do this. This is going to be really unique to each company and your circumstances. So, of course, you should report in the way that suits your circumstances best and your own processes, but we hope that these examples can offer you a little bit of inspiration to get started. So with the disclaimer clarified, we'll now move into starting the main module 1. So as we've said, we're starting with prepare, which is all around building a solid foundation of knowledge. So this is really about building on what you may already know from sustainability reporting standards and building on those frameworks that have already existed and informed the ISSB's work. So we like to tackle 3 aspects in this element of the training. So purpose is all around the case for sustainability reporting and the market business case. The landscape is all around how we've seen the market evolve, as we've mentioned. And finally, the global baseline is around the core concepts and requirements that sit within the IFRS S1 and S2 standards. So to get us started, we'll focus on the purpose side of things first. And so to help us with that, we have a brief question in Zoom to get a sense from you all as to where you're currently at. So I will just launch that Zoom poll for you now. So this first question, which should hopefully be appearing on the screen for you now, is asking what your reasons are for disclosing sustainability-related information. So you can select as many answers as are relevant for you here. So maybe it's regulatory requirements, sharing your management objectives, maybe it's social pressure or peer expectations, maybe it's investors, or perhaps you have other reasons as well. So feel free to share those reasons with us in the chat as well, if there's anything else that's driving your interest in the session today and your sustainability reporting. And of course, we know that some of you will be right at the start of the sustainability reporting journey as well, which of course is absolutely fine. So if you're just getting started with reporting, feel free to let us know that as well. Great. I see many of you have already been able to access the poll, so that's fantastic. So I'll just give us maybe 5 more seconds to participate, and then I'll share those results with you. Okay, I will close the poll there and share the results so that you can see those. So it looks like we've got a bit of a spread, but for many of you, it looks like, of course, regulatory requirements are your top driver, which is, of course, very understandable. And we also have investor interest coming in as a close second as well. But a number of you also kind of highlighting those aspects around peers or competitors and your management objectives. So bit of a spread, but regulators and investors coming out as key drivers, which I think is a common pattern that we see in many markets. But thank you very much for sharing with us. Great, so I'll stop sharing that, and moving on then, we'll kind of focus a little bit more on some of those drivers. So as you've shared, investor interest is one of your key drivers, and that's something that we see as a common picture globally as well. And what we wanted to just highlight with this slide is that growth that we've seen in signatories to the UN Principles for Responsible Investment. So we actually see now more than 5,000 signatories to these principles globally, representing over 121 trillion US dollars in assets under management. So a big uptick, I think you'll agree. So what is it that's really driving this interest from the investor community in responsible investment? So I think we wanted to highlight here is that what a key driver for this investor interest is that demand to understand the financial effects of sustainability reporting. So this information we're sharing with you on the screen here comes from a study of retail investors done by Morgan Stanley, where they actually found that the top driver for these investors driving their interest in sustainable investing was actually financial performance. So you can take a closer look at this in the handout if you want to follow that link. But I think what's important to highlight here is investor interest in this area is not just about wanting to manage impact and to take action on these issues, but it's really about the core financial integration of these issues into their investment decision-making as well. So building on that, I think what's important to remember today is that we're talking about disclosing financially material sustainability information. So we're going to talk a bit later in the session about materiality and what that means, but we wanted to start by being clear about the sorts of financial effects that our investors are looking at here. So firstly, we're looking at effects on the company's performance. So this can principally be seen in the revenue, so thinking about effects on the revenue mix or total revenue of an organization, perhaps if its demand for products and services might change as a result of sustainability risks, or maybe if it has impacts on production capacity or changes in the workforce, for example. And the second aspect that influences financial performance is changes in expenditure or operating costs. So, for example, if we see rising energy prices, increasing regulatory compliance costs, or the need to invest in R&D to deploy new technologies to manage sustainability risks and opportunities, we'll see changes in expenditure as well. And then the other aspect we'll talk about today, as well as effects, is the company's financial position. So here we see the company's financial position is reflected in the balance sheet, typically. So for example, a company might experience changes to certain assets or liabilities and their value due to climate or sustainability risks. So we might see changes in the value of particular assets that are exposed to climate transition risks, for example, or even write-offs of those assets if they become unviable in the future. And another financial effect that we can see is regarding the cost of capital. So this could be the cost of borrowing for a company or its insurance premiums if it's exposed to particular risks in certain aspects of its operations. And of course, as well, the positive impacts on cost of capital relating to access to new financial products such as green or social bonds. And a final element that we wanted to highlight in our opening here is around the concepts of sustainability, risks and opportunities. So you're probably familiar with this diagram from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. But I think what we want to highlight here is those risks that we might see in the near term, in the 2-year time frame, actually could be very different over the long-term 10-year time frame. So what we see here is that actually many sustainability and particularly environmental issues become increasingly material as risks over the long term. So what we want to highlight here is that nature of sustainability risk, where it materializes over a longer term time frame, requires us to think about these things a little bit differently. And of course, if we're taking action today to manage those long-term risks, we might actually see financial effects on our performance or position that occur sooner as a result of those actions we're having to take to manage the risks as well. And then another aspect that we wanted to highlight that's quite important to understand on sustainability risks and opportunities is their interconnectedness. So this is another diagram taken from that WEF risk report, which really just shows those different risk types that we have across ESG and aspects such as geopolitics and technology as well. But actually all of these issues, whilst we might think about them as separate topics for reporting, are of course very much interconnected. So when we're thinking about both our internal implementation and strategic decision making and our reporting, we need to also be thinking about how we connect our understanding of these different issues as well. Great, so that's just a little bit to set the tone and the concepts around purpose. So moving on to talk about landscape now, and I'll be handing over to Lois for the next section. So over to you, Lois. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Fiona, and hello, everybody. We've now covered why sustainability reporting is important because of the risks and the interest to investors and so on. And now we're going to look at how the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards have developed in the landscape of existing reporting standards. But before we do that, we're going to have another Zoom poll. And in this Zoom poll, we're going to have a look at what frameworks you're currently using. So let us know in the Zoom poll. You can select all that apply, which of the frameworks listed that you are currently using to disclose. Is it CDP, the Global Reporting Initiative Standards, GRI, the Integrated Reporting Framework, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board standards, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures recommendations, the principles of the UN Global Compact, or others? And if there are others, please let us know in the chat. Give you a moment to respond to this. B Corp. Thank you for letting us know, Justin. So we've got over 50% participation here, and there is a pattern emerging. So in the interest of time, I'm going to end the poll, share the results with you, and you can see that the majority of participants here are using the GRI standards, followed by, I think the next most popular one is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, with integrated reporting also being quite a widely used framework amongst participants here. So thank you very much for letting us know. That's very, very useful background. So moving on to the next slide now, we're going to have a little look at what is the IFRS Foundation and what is its structure. So as I'm sure many of you know, the IFRS Foundation is a not-for-profit public interest organisation that was established to develop high-quality, understandable, enforceable and globally accepted accounting and sustainability disclosure standards. At the bottom, you can see that the IFRS Foundation hosts two standard-setting boards. The International Accounting Standards Board, formed in 2001, issues financial accounting standards, and they are in place, have been adopted in over 140 jurisdictions around the world. The sister organisation, the International Sustainability Standards Board, that we're going to be talking about today, was formed in 2021 and released its first two standards in 2023 following strong market demand. The governance of these two standard-setting bodies is provided by the IFRS Foundation trustees, and they are in turn accountable to a monitoring board of public authorities. And by being within the same foundation, the two standard-setting boards can work very closely together, and their work complements each other. So what was the evolution of reporting standards? Well, you can see lots of logos on the screen with which I'm sure you are familiar. All of these organisations have contributed towards the evolution of sustainability reporting. They have a lot in common, but their objectives and guidelines and standards can differ, and this has caused confusion, some people calling it the alphabet soup of standard setting. Most of the organisations on the screen, they develop standards to respond to the information needs of investors, apart from GRI, whose work is for a wider range of stakeholders. Now, if there's one thing to take from this particular slide, although it looks busy with all the logos, it's a picture of simplification and harmonization. You can see all the arrows pointing towards the IFRS Foundation, and that's because these organizations have now been consolidated into the IFRS Foundation, or their work has been adopted by the IFRS Foundation. That's in the case of TCFD and the Transition Plan Task Force. Both of their work has now been adopted into the IFRS Foundation. And GRI and CDP are committed to aligning their work with the IFRS Foundation and are working together to do so. So let's have another look at a Zoom poll here. We've seen that the TCFD's work has been adopted into the IFRS Foundation and is reflected in their standards. So is this true or false? Companies who disclose using the TCFD recommendations automatically comply with the ISSB standards. Is this true or false? Give you a moment to think about that. I'm going to wait until we have more than 50% participation. Now we have very close result here. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. You can see that it's very close. 56% of you said it's false, 44% said it's true. Those of you that said it's false are correct, so well done. It is false. If you are currently using the TCFD recommendations, you will be a long way towards conforming with the ISSB standards, because ISSB standards are based on the TCFD recommendations. However, there are some differences that we're going to look at. So you cannot assume that if you use the TCFD recommendations, you automatically comply with the ISSB standards, because there are these differences. And thank you to the person in the chat who said it's partially true. Yes, that's right, it's partially true. So let's have a look at the next slide, where I think we're going to see some of these differences. First thing to point out is if you want to know the differences, there's a comparison document published by the ISSB, and you can see a thumbnail of that on the right hand of the screen. As I said just before, the TCFD's work is culminated, it's ended, and the IFRS Foundation has assumed responsibility for TCFD monitoring. There are three main differences between the ISSB standards and TCFD. One is that IFRS S2 on climate disclosure uses slightly different wording, but it's to capture the same information as TCFD, so it's a wording difference. The other difference is that IFRS S2 requires more detailed information, but still in line with TCFD recommendations, so perhaps a bit more information to be required on the use of carbon credits. And lastly, IFRS S2 has some additional requirements, and in particular here, the requirement that companies should use sector-specific standards for their disclosures, which we'll look at a bit later. So let's go on to look at the main objective of the ISSB, which was to set a global baseline of standards for sustainability information to enable comparable and consistent sustainability disclosure across capital markets. And the Foundation is working with jurisdictions around the world to achieve this. But the baseline serves, as it says, as something on which jurisdictions around the world and others can add their own building blocks. And those building blocks can be tailored to the needs of the individual jurisdiction or other stakeholders. For example, a stock exchange may add more building blocks. The building blocks can be added as long as they require information to be presented in such a way that does not obscure the information required by the global baseline. And the global baseline could be added to by building blocks that go beyond the remit of the ISSB to add jurisdiction or stakeholder-specific information using standards such as GRI. So taking this building block approach reduces the need to duplicate information by having globally consistent baseline of disclosures whilst allowing these building blocks to be added. Just quickly, in the interest of time, just want to let you know that the baseline is within the standards issued by the ISSB, which is the first icon you can see here. There's been widespread support for the global baseline, including from the International Organization of Securities Commission organization that announced its endorsement of ISSB standards and have asked their 130 members around the world to consider how to incorporate ISSB standards into their regulatory frameworks. By way of supporting infrastructure, the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board has issued International Sustainability Assurance Engagement Standard ISA 500. So that's been launched. 5,000 it is actually. The jurisdictions around the world are engaging with their stakeholders in consultations on the adoption process for the ISSB standards, and there's information on the ISSB's website about the progress of those consultations. And of course, there's capacity building work with market participants to support voluntary disclosure of the standards. So with that quick introduction to the ISSB and its standards, I'm going to hand over to Bella now to tell us more about the standards themselves.
Yes. Now so let's move on. Now we've talked about the business case and market case for sustainability reporting, the evolution of the landscape, and how it is being simplified and rationalized. Now let's introduce IFRS S1 and S2. As we start, it's important to know that there are some key terms that should be understood. You can find the definitions in your handout, but I wanted to briefly mention them here. First of all, we'll be saying the phrase sustainability-related financial information quite a lot. This can refer to a broad set of issues, including climate, nature, or biodiversity, human, social, or others. And sustainability-related financial information is information about a company's sustainability-related risks and opportunities that is useful to investors in making decisions about providing resources to the company. Sustainability-related risks and opportunities are those that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flows, access to finance, or cost of capital. It could affect the company's prospects. We will also often refer to general purpose financial reports, which includes a company's financial statements and management commentary. You might know this as a management report, management review, or strategic report. Some regulators require specific disclosures in certain parts of general purpose financial reports, so we use this generic phrase throughout. Okay. Anyone familiar with TCFD will recognize the same 4 core pillars or content areas for the ISSB standards. These are governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. For each core content area, there are a set of key disclosures to be addressed, and the standards provide very detailed guidance on these requirements. We will discuss each of the 4 content areas today, but I encourage you to download the standards as part of your homework assignment. Now let's start with IFRS S1. Or to give it its full title, General Requirements for Disclosure of Sustainability-Related Financial Information. IFRS S1 sets out general requirements for the content and the presentation of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. If you are familiar with TCFD, you will see the same architecture applied throughout the standards. S1 asks preparers to refer to and consider the applicability of the SIDC standards and other sources of further guidance to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities, and identify material information. The SIDC standards are organized by industry, enabling a company to identify disclosure topics and metrics applicable to its business model and operations. Finally, the standards can be used in conjunction with any accounting requirements. The scope of S1 is all sustainability topics except for climate, which is covered by S2. The second standard, S2, focuses on climate disclosures, building on the same foundation of S1. For example, it fully incorporates the recommendations of TCFD, and it sets out the requirements for a company to disclose material information about its climate-related risks and opportunities. And also, it requires the disclosure of both cross-industry and industry-specific information. In terms of climate-related risks, these include both physical and transition risk, which we will come back to later. Other specific climate-related disclosures are required, for example, on scenario analysis and the GHG emissions. Preparers must also refer to and consider the applicability of the industry-based guidance on implementing IFRS S2. As we've said already, this is organized by industry, enabling a company to identify climate-related disclosure topics and metrics applicable to its business model and operations. So the important thing is that S1 and S2 are not standalone standards. They are a package and must be applied together. Even when a company is reporting only on climate-related risks and opportunities, the company must apply both IFRS S1 and S2.
We seem to have lost Bella.
Useful for my clients. Sorry?
Apologies, Bella, please carry on.
Oh, okay. So S1, finally, S1 also explains the concept of materiality and how companies identify material sustainability-related financial information. Okay, next, let's consider some of the conceptual foundation that underpin the ISSB standards, which might be new to anyone without an accounting background. These concepts help us to understand how best to disclose information in order to meet the requirements of the ISSB standards. To start with, companies must fairly present a complete set of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Fair presentation also requires disclosures to be faithfully represented. To achieve this, companies shall provide a complete, neutral, and accurate depiction of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. The reporting entity concept requires the organizational boundary for sustainability-related financial disclosures and financial statements to be the same. Another important concept is connected information. We saw earlier when Fiona explained how different risks are often interconnected. The ISSB standards require companies to clearly identify key connections, such as those between risks and opportunities, connections between the four content areas, and connections between sustainability-related financial disclosures and the main financial statements. So next, let's have a look at an example. Over to you, Lois.
Thanks, Bella. Hello, everyone. Do you remember at the start that Fiona gave us a disclaimer? This is about the examples. So this is the first example we have. Just want to repeat the disclaimer that we show these by way of inspiration rather than suggesting that they represent best practice at all. This example is from a company called BHP, a global mining company, and it's from their 2023 annual report. So it will have been published probably before the standards were developed. But what it shows is the way in which the company makes connections between its decarbonisation strategy and its financial results and processes. There are three things being connected here. In the first paragraph, you'll see that BHP says all investment decisions consider the quantity of GHG emissions associated with the project, the cost per tonne of CO2 equivalent associated with the project, and the alignment with the group pathways to a net zero trajectory. So connection one, investment process connected with the decarbonisation strategy. Second, the decarbonisation strategy is connected with the types of expenditure now and in the future that have been spent on that strategy. So we can see in the second paragraph that $122 million was spent on initiatives associated with operational GHG emissions. But we can also see in the third paragraph what the company anticipates spending until 2030, which is $4 billion. That's the second connection. The third connection is between the decarbonisation projects and the net present value. So you see that in the penultimate paragraph there, where they tell us that the achievement of medium-term targets is expected to deliver positive net present value for the group. Final thing to note on this particular slide is the little orange text, which is a navigation tool that tells the reader where they can find more information about this. So back to you, Bella, for a Zoom poll, I think.
Thanks, Lois. Yes, the next one is another Zoom poll. Okay. So the question is, what information should be considered for connected information? So there are three options. The connections between governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And connections between sustainability-related financial disclosures and financial statements. And connections between sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So just a few more seconds to wait more responses. Okay, okay, almost 60% participated. So I'm going to end the poll. So the question is asking connected information. As I said earlier, all of the three options are right. So we need to make sure all the three perspectives or aspects connected. Okay, so let's move on. Yes. Oh, finally, the standards are built on the concept of materiality as defined by the IFRS Foundation. We are going to go into this in more detail later, but just to highlight that we will be referring today to material information, which is information that if omitted, misstated, or obscured, could reasonably be expected to affect investor decision-making. Okay. During the ISSB consultation on the exposure drafts, one of the key feedback topics was the importance of supporting preparers, particularly those with more limited resources and those in emerging markets. In addition to the standards and the application guidance published in 2023, a number of educational materials resources were also published, and since then others have followed, including the IFRS Knowledge Hub. We are also in the process of gathering examples and the case studies provided by our partners. The SIDC standards were aligned with IFRS as a tool to help preparers seeking industry-based guidance, and the FISA credential was also updated with more planned to come. I should also know that the IFRS Foundation's capacity building program, which is launched at COP27, is a key part of our support to preparers, and the SSE training initiatives is one of our most important deliverables. Okay, so now let's move on to another Zoom poll. Yes, water is a vital input to our business, but the ISSB standards do not currently have a specific standards on water. What do you do? So there are 4 choices. The A is do not disclose anything about water. And the second is consult the sources of guidance listed by ISSB. And the third one is engage a consultancy to help. The fourth one is copy your competitors' reporting. Okay. So we already have over 50% participated. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. Okay, share the results. Oh, okay. So for this question, because water is a vital input to your business, which means water-related information is material information for your company, for your business. So we can't choose option 1, which is don't disclose anything about water. The red one is consult the sources of guidance listed by ISSB, which is also the requirements by S1. But maybe you also find option C and option D helpful. But for this question, the right answer is option B. Okay. So now I'm going to hand over to Fiona.
Thanks very much, Bella, for that. Much appreciated. So great. As Bella said, that brings us to wrap up our first module. So before we go to the exercise, we'll just take a couple of minutes here to recap on what we've learned so far. So firstly, we reviewed the purpose of sustainability-related disclosures. And a key takeaway I think we hope that you'll leave this workshop with is that there are important benefits both internally and externally for collecting and disclosing sustainability-related financial information. So if you're not aiming to make good use of that data that you're collecting to improve your strategic decision-making, you're ultimately going about this the wrong way and you're potentially missing a real opportunity there. As well, we'd highlight that if you have operations in hard to abate or high impact sectors, your competitors may already be disclosing these risks and identifying opportunities that they're pursuing. So that will then leave you in a position that your investors are wondering why you might be lagging behind them, and ultimately that could start to affect your ability to raise funds in the longer term. And next we looked at the evolution of disclosure standards, so the formation of the ISSB and the aims to simplify the landscape. And when you're thinking about voluntary disclosures, you shouldn't see those as competing with the ISSB, but rather building on top of them. And finally, we introduce the standards and concepts you need to understand in order to use the standards correctly. And a key point I want to reiterate here is that these standards and the guidance that come with them are designed to meet the needs of investors. And so they are heavily focused on those prospects relating to financial effects and financial position and performance that we discussed at the start of this unit. Great. So with that, we will now move into our first exercise to close the module. So we'll be heading back to Menti for this. I've shared the link in the chat to that. We might just repost that again so that you have that front. Thank you, Lois. But the first question will be kind of around identifying the skills and knowledge gaps in your organization. So thinking really around how you're going to identify those gaps and what processes you could use to help you understand maybe what's missing. Oh, excuse me, not sure why that moved again. What's missing in the disclosure and what skills internally you might need to help you with that. And you also might want to think here around how you set the tone from the top and in terms of engaging your leadership to drive the process. So let me switch to sharing Menti with you on this end so we can see the responses coming through. Okay, great. I see some of you have already been able to respond to that, so that's great. So here we have some ideas around checking trainings availability and recruitment, identifying the requirements needed by attending training and development. Yes, exactly. So hopefully this session today will help you with that. Conducting a gap analysis. Yes, absolutely. A good structured approach that will help you to really understand where you are today and what you need to do differently. We also have a survey. Yes, I think that could be a very good way, perhaps sharing a survey with your colleagues or even your stakeholders to understand maybe where you're at currently and how to improve. Great, so lots more responses coming in. Thanks, everyone. So readiness project, yeah, so setting it up as a project may be a good idea to bring that focus to the topic. Doing a baseline review, understanding capacity building again. So establishing a dedicated sustainability reporting team to align financial disclosures with ISSB guidelines, assessing gaps and integrating ESG factors into decision-making. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a really good structured approach to drive this forward. And I think when you're establishing that team, making sure, as you say, that they're really working closely with your financial colleagues, or indeed are your financial colleagues potentially, will be very helpful. So looking at your internal resources and knowledge capacity, as well as your SRO. Yeah, so those, I think that's referring to this, I think, the sustainability risks and opportunities, if I'm not mistaken. Working with IFRS, certified integrated reporting training partner. Yes, that would be brilliant to do so. Lots of organizations are obviously starting to provide those forms of services. Attending training, indeed. Great. So focusing on strategy and actions to reduce carbon at all levels across all three scopes and their extended impacts. Yeah, interesting. Studying the standard and comparing it to current practice. Absolutely. There's no better substitute for, getting your head into the standards themselves to really understand them and do quite a structured approach to mapping that against what you're already doing. And then maybe, as you say, perhaps engaging a consultant to help you in any areas that you need. And I think that's a good point raised here regarding change initiatives and the need to assess culture. I think that's a very good point. So it's all well to take this as a technical exercise, but actually the thinking that's required, on sustainability actually requires a bit of a mindset shift potentially in terms of how your organization thinks about its financial risks and opportunities and the connection with sustainability. So thinking about how you can really drive the right cultural mindset to support that, I think, is an excellent point to raise. And thinking around concentration to more concentration on contingent liabilities, not just assets. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for raising that point as well. Brilliant. Thank you for that, everyone. So I'll leave that open if you do want to share any more thoughts, but I will take us back to the slide presentation on my other screen here. Sorry for looking away from you, just doing a bit of juggling. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, feel free to keep sharing in the background while we move along. But that brings us to the end of module 1 and now the start of module 2. So I'll hand back over to Bella again for that. And sorry, Bella, just to flag, you were having a little bit of connectivity issues last time. So I'd recommend perhaps leaving your video off just to see if that helps your connection, if that's okay.
Okay, sure. Thanks for your reminder, Fiona. So I will let my camera off. Okay, now we have introduced the initial concepts. Let's dive into how to apply the ISSB standards, taking into account additional disclosures, including any relevant geographical or sectorial requirements, as well as peer practices and your leadership's objectives. So in order to understand how to ensure your disclosures meet global standards, we will look at two key concepts in this unit. The first and the main focus of this unit will be on how to apply the standards to achieve a global baseline for disclosure. Once we cover that, we will also discuss how additional disclosures fits. To begin, let's focus first on how to apply the ISSB standards as the global baseline. Okay, let's get started on the first core content, governance. This includes aspects that relate to the governance body in your company and how management is applied. For each of the core content areas, we will discuss questions that you could ask in your company to start identifying the information that will support some of the disclosure requirements. For example, as part of a gap analysis. So if we look at the governance and the management requirements, we can see that there are several that are fairly qualitative. For example, which bodies are responsible for the oversight and management of processes, controls, and procedures of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. For example, is management responsibility delegated to a specific role or committee? And also, how and when do they get informed about sustainability-related risks and opportunities? How these issues inform strategy, decision-making, and risk management. This could include setting targets to manage sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And finally, whether progress against these targets links to executive remuneration. For more information, you can make use of the ISSE checklist tool, but remember it's not a replacement for reading and using the full ISSB standards. Okay, now let's move on to another example. I'm going to hand over to Lois.
Thanks, Bella. And this is an example to illustrate how a bank called AIB, an Irish High Street bank, illustrates their governance structure for overseeing and governing sustainability and other things. So you can see that in this governance model, there are 3 board committees: the Board Risk Committee, the Sustainable Business Advisory Committee, and the Board Audit Committee. And each in turn is supported by an executive subcommittee and management. So in this case, there's a clear demarcation between audit, risk and sustainability, including the split between financial and non-financial disclosures. So this is just one way in which governance structures can be organised, and I think in later reports the AIB group has updated this with a lot more detail. But it serves here as an illustration for you as to the type of arrangements that companies have that are often also in line with the governance principles that apply to their jurisdiction. So I think hand to you now, Fiona, to take us through the strategy section.
Many thanks, Lois. That's great. So as we're now moving past from that example, which hopefully helps to bring to light governance, we're going to now look at the next content area around strategy. So strategy does have a fair few more disclosures to it than governance, but it's really where you can see the benefits from sustainability related opportunities and risk management as well. So as you can see here, there are 3 high-level areas that we focus on in the strategy content area. These are risks and opportunities, effects, and resilience. So we're going to review each of these separately. But before we do, we want to start again with a few questions to evaluate here. So IFRS S1 and S2 disclosure requirements on strategy are designed to enable users of your reports to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So if we first look at the requirements related to sustainability-related risks and opportunities, here are some of the questions you want to be thinking about. So when disclosing information about risks, this requires a description of the effects, the time horizons under which those effects are expected, and here you should also keep in mind that financial effects can occur both before the risk or opportunity materializes or after as well, and they can change over time. And the last 2 questions on this list in particular look at climate, aligning to the requirements from S2. So for example, investors also want to understand what types of risks and opportunities there are. And here we often see companies using the categories that have been identified in the TCFD of transition risk and physical risk. So both the S1 and S2 standards include guidance to support you in identifying and disclosing risks and opportunities. And they recommend as well that you look to industry-based guidance and other areas such as the SIDC standards, which provide metrics and considerations of different risks and opportunities for different industries. So again, we know an example might help to add a little bit of colour to what we're talking about here. So let's have a look at an example of this from Gold Fields, which is a diversified gold producer with mines in South Africa, Australia, Ghana, Chile, and Peru. So this extract comes from their integrated annual report, and we can see here which risks the company has identified, how they've identified them using a prioritization matrix, and how those risks align with their strategic priorities, and also how they have put in place different mitigation approaches as well. So there's a lot more within the report that explains each of these risks areas, but I think it's helpful to see how they've identified those and how they're really connecting those sustainability risks and opportunities to their core strategic priorities as well. So another aspect of the risks and opportunities identified as having a potential financial effect that will need to be disclosed brings us back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is time. So you might remember we discussed earlier that time as a factor can be quite different when we're talking about sustainability related disclosures, with longer term time horizons perhaps, and also considerations about when the effects and impacts may occur. So the standards asks you to identify within what time horizon any material effects are expected to occur. And definitions of short, medium, and long-term horizons will vary between companies because they depend on a range of factors. For example, your investment and business planning cycles, the strategic planning horizons of your organization, or perhaps the lifespan of your assets or the context of your operational activities. So what's important to remember here is that whilst time horizons may differ between companies, it is important that you are clear within your reporting as to what you mean by short, medium, and long term. So don't necessarily assume that your investors will know that. Make sure that that's an explicit element that you disclose in your reporting. So moving on now to the second group of disclosures in the strategy category. So the first section we spoke about there was around identifying risks and opportunities. And this next set of disclosure requirements focuses on what the effects of those opportunities and risks are and where that will occur in the business. So to start tackling these disclosure requirements, companies might want to ask themselves questions such as beginning to describe these effects and understanding the responses planned for mitigating or adapting to the effects. And again, here's where an example might help just to show how one organization is doing this. So this example is taken from the global chemical producer BASF's annual report in 2023. So the company acknowledge in their strategy that they're very much affected by climate change and also by scarcity of natural resources, pressure on ecosystems, and a growing population. And as we discussed in the first set of questions for strategy, they were able to show in their report which risks and opportunities that they were expecting would affect them. But furthermore, they go then to explain the effects of these different issues. So they say that their business in the chemical sector has a key role to play in addressing the challenges they've identified through innovation, through using raw materials more efficiently, reducing waste, enabling healthy food production, and also in climate smart mobility as well. So as well as the changes they're hoping that the chemical sector and their company can offer society and the economy, the company itself, of course, is going to need to undergo profound changes to manage those issues. And these transitions will need to happen across the value chain. And as they show in this excerpt here, we identify within the reporting different elements of their supply chain that need to be addressed and where some of those effects may occur within their productions, within the product areas, etc. So as we saw in that example, the disclosure was qualitative, and we know that one of the obstacles companies face when reporting on these effects is what detail they should be disclosing. And of course, they were showing mostly qualitative information there, but what about quantitative information as well? So a company is required to disclose both both quantitative and qualitative information about the current and anticipated financial effects of sustainability-related risks or opportunities. However, the standards also set out criteria for when only qualitative information is required. So companies may use only qualitative information for current and anticipated financial effects if they cannot separate the effects of a climate risk or opportunity from other effects, or if there is a high level of measurement uncertainty. And additionally, only qualitative information is permitted if the company doesn't have the skills, capabilities, or resources to provide that quantitative information. So hopefully that helps to provide a little bit more clarity there on how to approach that concern. So that brings us now to the last part of the strategy component. So the first part there was, of course, risks and opportunities. The second part was around the effects of those risks and opportunities. And now this final group of disclosures under strategy is all around how the company is preparing for uncertainties and considering its resilience in the future. And this really gets into the practices and processes that a company has in place to assess its resilience and to make strategic adjustments where needed. So disclosures here include information on what types of assessment are used and how scenario analysis in particular is used. And at the heart of it, resilience disclosure requirements ask the company to disclose their assessment of climate resilience and the inputs and key assumptions that they've used in that process. So we'll dive deeper into scenario analysis in a moment, but some questions that you can consider asking internally when starting to disclose this information focus on the company's capacity to react or adjust to uncertainties and how different scenarios are being used to test this. So let's have a look at another example here. I should say as well, if you have the slide handout from the website, we have a few extra examples in there as well that we'd encourage you to look at in your own time. But the one example we wanted to highlight for you today is the Belgian multinational chemical company, Solvay. And in particular, we're looking at how they disclose the financial effects of different issues that they face and how they've used scenario analysis to support them in understanding these financial effects. So they're quite transparent within their reporting in particular about the estimates that they use and how they've developed their scenario analysis. And although, of course, scenario analysis is one tool that you can use, investors need to understand how you are using it. So they note the assumptions that they've used, they indicate which scenarios they've employed and the fact that they've worked with a leading consulting firm to assist them with this, and also that their internal experts have worked with that tool as well. And we won't go into all of this detail, but you can read it in the handout. They talk a little bit about actually how they've then applied the scenario analysis to the different business activities they've had and where they might expect to see some financial effects. So, for example, they talk about their soda ash business, which is a material that goes into glass and other products, and how actually they may expect to see increased costs of raw materials in this business, which will affect their margins, and what they're doing about that. So I think it's quite an interesting example. Okay, so that brings us into another Zoom poll then, which I'll just launch for you, just to have a little reflect on what we've covered there. So the next question is, a company may choose to disclose only qualitative information and or combined quantitative information about current and anticipated financial effects when? And you may choose which, if any, of the following are correct reasons why they may choose to disclose qualitative information or a mix. So either if the company can't separate the effects of a climate-related risk or opportunity from other effects, if there's a high level of measurement uncertainty, or if perhaps quantitative information sheds a negative light on the company. So thanks everyone for participating. I'll just give you another moment to read those, and you can select more than one if you like, but let us know which of those you think would be correct. Give you a little bit longer on that one. Okay. As we did before, I'll just make sure we get over half. Oh, great. I see the numbers coming up a little bit there. See a few more responses. I'll give you 1 or 2 more seconds, and then I will close the poll and share those results with you. So yes, the vast majority of you got that correct. So those first 2 are indeed, as we covered, valid reasons why you may choose to disclose qualitative information or a mix of qualitative and quantitative. And indeed, as most of you saw, the final option is not a correct answer. So, of course, we are expecting organisations to provide balance in their reporting regarding both negative and positive financial effects, and to quantify them where they can. And I think hopefully the Solvay example illustrates that in that instance where they are, of course, disclosing those financial effects quantitatively of a potential negative impact on their margins. So important to be balanced in your reporting there. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. So that brings us on then to the next section, which Lois will be taking us through. Thanks, Lois.
Thanks, Fiona. So we're going to look now at the climate-specific considerations that apply to the strategy pillar of disclosure. So across S1 and S2, the structure of the requirements is the same. And in fact, the governance and risk requirements are very, very similar. But there are some differences between S1 and S2 when we come to look at the strategy disclosures. So let's have a look at what those are. Now, we say from TCFD to ISSB here now, so that for those of you that are familiar with TCFD can see in more detail what the differences are that we described earlier. But if you're not familiar with TCFD, don't worry, because this really acts as a list here of the sorts of things that are different in the strategy disclosures in S2 compared with S1. So, what are the things that S2 asks for? Well, it requires a company to refer to and consider the applicability of industry-based disclosure topics when making its reporting. So these industry-based disclosure topics can be found on the IFRS website. They're based on the SIDC standards, and you'll find disclosure requirements for a range of different sectors there, which will help you identify the topics on which you need to report for your sector, and also the metrics that are associated with those topics. S2 requires more detailed information on where in the business model and the value chain risks and opportunities are concentrated. So this might be, for example, where there are physical risks in particular areas or particular commercial risks that are associated with climate change. Thirdly, in describing the effects of climate-related risks and opportunities, the company should disclose how it has responded to and plans to respond to the identified risks and opportunities that it has identified. And it also needs to report on its transition plan if it has one, which we'll talk about in a moment. The IFRS S2 sets out the criteria for when quantitative and qualitative information is required for disclosure of current and anticipated financial effects. So we know that it's very challenging for companies to quantify the anticipated financial effects of climate-related risks and opportunities, but the standard sets out the circumstances in which it is fine only to disclose qualitative information, for example, when a company cannot separately identify the effects of the risk or opportunity, or when the level of measurement uncertainty is so high that it would make the disclosure not very useful. When preparing information on certain disclosures, including on anticipated financial effects of risks and opportunities, IFRS S2 says that companies are only required to use all reasonable and supportable information available at the reporting date without undue cost and effort, and it is commensurate with the company's circumstances for specific requirements. So again, a measure in the standards that recognises that some of these disclosures are quite challenging. Just use reasonable and supportable information. Now, IFRS S2 does say to companies that in assessing their strategic resilience, they should use climate scenarios for their analysis. But the standard does not specify the particular scenarios that companies should use. This is for the company to decide when using its when assessing its strategic resilience to climate risk. There is some additional information required on strategic resilience to climate risk, and they're things like describing significant areas of uncertainty considered by the company in its resilience assessment. What is the company's capacity to adjust and adapt its strategy and business model over time in order to remain resilient? And how the climate-related scenario analysis was carried out. So I mentioned that one of the things IFRS S2 asks for is for details of the company's climate transition plan, if it has one. So there's no requirement to have a transition plan. There is a requirement to disclose details of the transition plan if you have one. So what is a transition plan? Well, IFRS S2 defines a transition plan as an aspect of the company's overall strategy that includes targets, actions, or resources for the transition towards a lower carbon economy, including, for example, GHG emissions reductions plans. So because it's an aspect of the company's overall strategy, in the first bullet point, we see there that the transition plan should align internally with that strategy and with the business case and business motivation and decarbonisation levers that are most technologically and economically feasible for the company to use. The transition plan should also be aligned with science, including what science says about the requirements for net zero to be achieved and how carbon neutrality or Paris-aligned goals are explained in terms of science. The transition plan should set long-term transition goals with clear mitigation and adaptation activities and targets and interim milestones to monitor progress towards the long-term goals. The transition plan should be transparent about the dependencies for its success. So what does it need for the plan to be successful? What are the risks and challenges associated with implementing and succeeding in the plan? And how will the company deal with residual or unabated GHG emissions? The transition plan should also be informed by sector-specific pathways. These are published by different organisations, including, for example, the Mission Possible Partnership, and therefore a company can test its transition plan against those sector-specific pathways. And finally, companies should consider how the transition plan will be evaluated by people that read it, including their investors, and that the plan has the hallmarks of credibility. Now, these hallmarks are set out by various organisations. There's quite a big list of them, but including the Climate Bonds Initiative and CDP, for example, set out the hallmarks of a credible transition plan. So there are lots and lots of resources that can help companies with their transition planning, and we can only show on this slide a few examples of them. In the middle, you can see resources that have been prepared by the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, and they have set out expectations for the real economy, financial institutions, and certain sectors, so their materials are very useful. At the end, you see the work of the transition pathway, the transition plan task force. They set out a disclosure pathway. Now, two things to say about that. First of all, the TPT framework was based on and drew on the work of GFANZ, so those two things are aligned. Next most important thing to say is that TPT's work has now been adopted into the IFRS Foundation. So the Foundation has assumed responsibility for the disclosure-specific materials developed by the Transition Plan Task Force, and their materials can now be found on the IFRS Foundation Knowledge Hub, which we'll be showing you later. So the pyramid, the little triangle on the left-hand side, is really just to show you that these organisations, TPT, GFANZ, IFRS Foundation, they're all designed to support each other's work and to add layers of detail that support the IFRS Foundation's requirement that companies should make disclosures about their transition plans. So, with a big thanks for your participation so far, we're going to take a short break now. So a little opportunity for you to get a drink, have a stretch, and perhaps submit some more questions to us, because we do love to answer your questions. So I will start the timer now for a 5-minute break, and we'll see you back after the break. Hello, everyone, and welcome back from the break. Hope you had a chance for a stretch and a drink. And we're going to now move on to the third core content component of the disclosure standards, which is risk management. And you can see from the high-level description here that these disclosure requirements ask companies to provide information about their process for risk management, for sustainability-related risks and opportunities, as well as how those fit with their overall risk profile and are integrated. So the questions that are relevant to evaluating your risk management disclosures are: what processes and policies are being used to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities? And how is the risk and opportunity management integrated into the company's overall enterprise risk management processes? So whereas the other components of disclosure are very much asking the company about its plans, outputs, inputs, actions, this is more about the process used for the management of risks and opportunities. So you might be thinking about what are the inputs and parameters you use for risk management, whether and how sustainability-related risks and opportunities are prioritized, what criteria are used in your processes for assessing risks and opportunities related to sustainability. So are there criteria related to the nature of the risk, the likelihood, the magnitude, the velocity? What are the criteria that you use? What's the monitoring process for how those risks and opportunities unfold and develop? And are those processes subject to change at any time? So we know that the risk management disclosures are fairly similar across the S1 and S2, but there are some specific requirements in S2 about risk management. I've touched on some of these already, and they're things like, is there more detailed information about the input parameters used to identify risks? How is climate-related scenario analysis used, whether for resilience analysis or risk identification? And have risk management processes changed? And is there anything that needs to be said about opportunities and how the management of those opportunities are integrated into the company's overall risk management process? The other thing to note about IFRS S2 is that we actually have a definition of climate-related risk in S2, and this originates from the TCFD's work. So you'll be familiar with these if you know TCFD's work. So there are two types of climate-related risks. Transition risks arise from efforts to transition to a lower carbon economy, and they're often categorized as policy and legal, technological, market and reputational risks. We've got some examples of these types of risks in the middle of the slide here. So they could include things like increased pricing of GHG emissions, more reporting obligations, exposure to litigation, costs of technologies associated with the transition, and so on. The other type of risk that's defined in the standard are physical risks. These can be acute physical risks that arise from weather-related events such as storms, floods, drought, and heat waves, which we know are increasing in severity and frequency. Or they can be chronic physical risks from longer-term shifts in climatic patterns, including changes in rainfall, temperature, sea level rise, reduced water availability or quality, biodiversity loss, and changes in soil quality. And again, we have some examples in the middle of the screen at the bottom. So increased severity of weather events and changing weather patterns. So the thing to say about all of these examples and types of risks is that they can carry financial implications for the company in both cases. They can affect cash flows, access to finance, cost of capital, and these financial effects can be felt over different time horizons and in different ways. We also have a definition within S2 of climate-related opportunities. So these are the potential positive effects arising from climate change for a company. So the types of opportunities come from resource efficiency. Efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change can also cover things like improving processes, using lower emission sources of energy, developing products and services that are in line with the expectations of a lower carbon economy, finding new markets for products and services, and enhancing the company's resilience to climate-related risk and opportunity. And indeed, we see some of these examples in the middle of the screen. Again, these opportunities can give rise to financial effects on cash flows, access to finance, cost of capital, revenue, the position perhaps will affect the balance sheet. And all of these things can take place over different time horizons and can manifest in different ways by way of positive financial and possibly reputational effects. So let's have a little look at an example of an organisation in the UK and the way in which they've looked at their climate risk and opportunity assessment. This example is from NATS, which is the UK air navigation service provider. It handles UK domestic and North Atlantic air traffic control. So as you can imagine, the air navigation services are acutely aware of weather-related and physical risks. And we know that bad weather already causes delays for airlines, airports and passengers, and that in turn can lead to increased carbon dioxide emissions due to aircraft circling or holds. So what we see in this example is that the company has examined its current acute risks and impacts. So this goes back to 2019 in the first panel. They look at the estimated costs of major storms on aviation, but they also look at the way in which bad weather has caused extra miles of flying and extra fuel to be used and more CO2 to be burnt. In the middle panel of this example, we see that NATS has done some forecasting about weather events in 2050, and they see that their projections are likely to worsen the figures of air traffic control management and so on, and to produce extra tons of CO2 emissions. And finally, they have some, at the end of, in the final panel, they track some of the possible outcomes of these chronic changes. There can be some positive and some negative effects, as they describe in the final panel. So we've looked at risk management now, and I'm going to turn to Bella to take us through the core content on metrics and targets. Over to you, Bella.
Thanks so much, Lois. So now let's continue with the last core content area, metrics and targets. We will now spend some time reviewing the disclosure requirements on metrics and targets in more detail. Yeah, the final core content area of the standards. Okay, let's start with metrics. Requirements on metrics are designed to enable investors to understand the company's performance in relation to its sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Preparers shall disclose information explaining how the metrics are defined, if they are absolute or relative, if they have been validated by a third party, as well as the methodology. What is the method of calculation? What were the inputs? Are there limitations? And what assumptions are involved? Now let's move on to the second part of this category, targets. Requirements on targets are designed to enable investors to understand the targets a company has set to monitor progress towards achieving its strategic goals. Disclosures include whether they are qualitative or quantitative, and whether it is set voluntarily or by law or regulation. Disclosures also include the metric used to set the target and to monitor progress towards its achievement, the baseline period from which progress is measured, and the period to which the target applies. Disclosures include what are the milestones and the interim targets, if there have been any revisions to the target, together with an explanation about the revisions. Okay, so on the next slide, there is another example. Over to you, Lois.
Yes, this example is from a company called ArcelorMittal, which is a multinational steel manufacturing and mining corporation. And you can see it's from their 2022 annual report. So again, bear in mind that some of these examples were produced before the ISSB standards were developed. But nevertheless, it does tell us, give us some insight into how companies express their targets. The first thing to note from this example is that the context for the target is described. So the company wants to have a leadership position within the steel industry and to achieve net zero steel making globally by 2050. So you've got the context there that you would expect the target to relate to. Sorry, I think we've just lost our slide there. Sometimes the slides just move forwards and backwards because we've got a lot of people involved here. Sorry about that. So we were saying we've got the context for the target there. Then we move on to see, well, what are the actual targets? So you can see those in the middle of the first panel. The targets are to reduce carbon emissions intensity by 25% globally and 35% in Europe for 2030. So it doesn't have to be one target for the whole organization or for a particular company. They can be regional targets, as we see here, or global targets. We also see that the company tells us the scope of the targets. So the targets cover both scopes 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions for steel and mining per ton of crude steel. Now, all of these targets are set out in the context of a roadmap that the company developed in 2021. So you can see the progression that the company intends. They also tell us in that first paragraph what they're investing in the achievement of the targets and their commitment to achieve net zero steelmaking by 2050, and that's $10 billion. In the rest of this example on the right-hand side, the company's telling us about the dependencies for successfully reaching their targets. They can't control all of these dependencies. In some cases, they need supportive policy making and regulatory frameworks to support their ambitions. And they also tell us the assumptions behind the plan to deliver. So with that example from ArcelorMittal on how they describe their targets, I'm going to hand back to Bella to take us through metrics and targets a bit more.
Thanks, Lois. Okay, now let's talk about some of the climate-specific considerations for disclosures on metrics and targets. Okay, the TCFD framework included recommended disclosures, which IFRS S2 builds on and as part of the required disclosures. For example, IFRS S2 requires disclosure of industry-based metrics relevant to a company's business model and activities. Additional disclosures are required on GHG emissions, including separate disclosures for the consolidated accounting group and the associated joint ventures, and information about the company's financed emissions. In addition, S2 sets out a Scope 3 measurement framework to provide guidance for preparing Scope 3 GHG emissions disclosures. While S2 doesn't explicitly require a company to disaggregate its GHG emissions disclosures, by the constituent gases. S1 includes requirements on disaggregation that would result in the disclosure of the constituent gases being required if such disaggregation provides material information. I'd like to remind everyone that you can access more information on climate metrics in the ISSB's training tool on this topic. We will share the link in the chat, and you can also find it on the ISSB's website. Likewise, there are some additional disclosures compared to TCFD for targets as well. For example, S2 requires disclosures about how the latest international agreement on climate change has informed the target and whether the target has been validated by a third party. S2 also requires disclosure of more detailed information on GHG emissions targets, including additional information about any planned use of carbon credits to achieve a company's net GHG emissions targets. And S2 also includes additional requirements to disclose information about the approach to setting and reviewing each target, and how it monitors progress against each target, including whether the target was derived using a sectorial decarbonization approach. Questions on GHG emissions often come up in questions on metrics and targets disclosures, so we wanted to address some of this briefly. For those who may not be familiar with the different scopes, so emissions that occur from sources or controlled by the company, such as emissions from your company's facilities or vehicles. And Scope 2 includes emissions from generation of acquired and consumed electricity, steam, heat, and cooling, such as the electricity you purchase. And finally, Scope 3 is then all other indirect emissions that occur in the company's value chain. S2 requires a company to disclose its absolute gross Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 GHG emissions in accordance with the GHG Protocol corporate standard, unless a jurisdiction requires a company to use a different approach to measurement. If a company is using a different measurement method, there is a transition relief to use that method in its first year of applying the standard. Whether and how the company is using an internal price on carbon for decision-making is also required to disclose, and whether and how executive remuneration is linked to climate change. Okay, so it's time for another example. Over to you, Lois.
Thank you, Bella. And this example comes from a company called Enel, which is an Italian producer and distributor of electricity and gas. And this is an example of the way in which Enel, in their 2022 sustainability report, showed its GHG emissions and how they are disaggregated or broken down. So at the top of the page, you can see the company's carbon footprint. It's broken down by Scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions, and they show the total. The pale green bars show us the 2021 figures, the dark green bars show us the 2022 figures. So not only can we see the breakdown across the scopes, but we can also see the comparative year-on-year figures that show us how the trends are changing over time. Sorry if we're seeing a little movement of the slides again. Here we are, we're back to Enel. So we've looked at the carbon footprint, the fact that we can see the trend. Scope 3 is the highest amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and we can see the trend year on year. At the bottom of the screen, you can see how the Scope 1 emissions are broken down between the company's business lines, so generation, trading, networks, end customers, and others. You can see immediately from the green bars that the majority of Scope 1 emissions come from the generation of thermal sources, that is from the combustion of fuels in generation activities. You can see how the numbers compare from 2021 to 2022. There are some little dots above some of these figures, and those dots refer to whether and to what extent the greenhouse gas source is considered within a target that is a science-based target. There are little numbers as well, and those numbers refer us to notes where we have narrative giving us more information about the composition of the greenhouse gases. So in the note 1 that accompanies the generation activity Scope 1 figures, we're told that the majority of emissions come from carbon dioxide, although there's also some methane and other gases. So the point to think about here is that in one little diagram, we've got quite a lot of information about the breakdown of the company's greenhouse gas emissions. So let's turn now to a Zoom poll. And this Zoom poll, the question is, what is the objective of the metrics disclosure requirements? And you could select all that apply. Is the objective to understand the company's performance in relation to its sustainability-related risks and opportunities, to understand progress towards any targets, or to understand the company's assumptions for the future? And I'll just give you a moment to think about that. Right, we've got a good level of participation now and a pattern emerging, so I'll end the poll, share the results with you. And you can see that the majority of you said it's the first two are the objectives of metrics and targets. Some of you have said that one of the objectives is to understand the company's assumptions for the future. It may be that the metrics do help people understand that. The reason for asking the question in this way is that all of the requirements we've looked at, they start in the standard by explaining the objective of the disclosure requirement. So in the case of metrics in S1, paragraph 45, we see that the objective of the disclosures on metrics is to enable users of information to understand the company's performance in relation to its sustainability-related risks and opportunities and its progress towards any targets it set. So this question is really to encourage you to look at the standard itself and to think about preparing your disclosures in the context of the stated objective. Of course, it's true that you may get to understand the company's future assumptions for the future from the metrics, but the standard tells us that the objective for the disclosure requirements are as in A and B. So well done. Most of you were absolutely right. Let's turn on now to look at the next part of our Align module. And this, we've looked at the core content disclosures that meet the ISSB standards. So that was the global baseline. But as many of you are aware, you might also be subject to regulatory requirements, and you might need to make additional disclosures for other stakeholders or in line with management's objectives or for a whole host of other reasons. So we're going to talk about what to do about those additional disclosures and what they look like. So these additional disclosures build on the global baseline we discussed earlier. And where do they come from? Well, they might come from local requirements or listing requirements, maybe for both listed and non-listed companies. And they may be disclosures required for particular purposes. They might apply to your supply chain as well. They might be disclosures that are designed to help jurisdictions understand how companies are contributing to policy objectives and how companies are affected by policies. So this might be things like how incentives like tax cuts or subsidies encourage sustainable practices, also how disincentives to counter non-sustainable activities are affected by policies. Companies might also be asked to provide additional information beyond the baseline to align with emerging industry practices and standards on how particular sectors are managing and responding to sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And of course, information can be required to serve the information needs of users other than investors. So the baseline is in the standards, and jurisdictions must consider themselves whether, to what extent, and how to adopt the ISSB standards. So this is monitored on the IFRS website, and you can see the link right at the bottom of this slide that there are many jurisdictions, more than 20 now, that have decided to use or are taking steps to introduce the ISSB standards into their regulatory frameworks. And the IFRS Foundation provide dedicated support to those jurisdictions to help them with their adoption programs through the regulatory implementation program at the IFRS Foundation. Of course, some of the additional disclosures you make might come from existing frameworks and guidances that you're using. So, you might rely on the CDP questionnaire or GRI standards, which we saw at the beginning's Zoom poll that many of you rely upon. So the IFRS Foundation is actively working with many of these developers of frameworks to ensure as much alignment and interoperability as possible. So, for example, CDP has aligned their climate questionnaire with IFRS S2. The GHG protocol is the protocol that must be used for calculating GHG emissions according to the ISSB standards. But the ISSB is now working with the GHG protocol team to ensure that as the GHG protocol corporate standard is updated, the ISSB standards are taken into consideration. We'll talk more about the GRI in a moment and the efforts going on to align their activities. We've already talked about the fact that the Transition Plan Task Force work on disclosure has already been taken into the IFRS Foundation. So you can find their work on the IFRS Knowledge Hub. And as far as nature-related disclosures are concerned, the ISSB is considering in its work plan how it will build upon the recommendations of the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures. So a lot of alignment activity going on that ensures that if you do make additional disclosures, for example, on biodiversity or nature, there will already have been some consideration by the ISSB as to how to make those requirements as lined up with things that you already do as possible. So I said we were going to look at GRI and ISSB's working relationship a bit more. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see a thumbnail of a document that they produced together showing the interoperability of their respective requirements on GHG emissions disclosure. And that concluded that there's a great deal of overlap and synergy between their work. The GRI and IFRS Foundation, they are jointly and publicly committed to identifying and aligning common disclosures that address information needs under their distinct scopes of work, but so that their standards are as aligned as possible. And there's a collaboration to deliver full operability, starting with GRI's 101 biodiversity standard and the ISSB's work plan project on biodiversity ecosystems and ecosystem services. and the IFRS Foundation is a convening partner of GRI's Sustainability Innovation Lab. So a close working relationship between these two organisations. Now, may be not so much for this audience, but many organisations, of course, are subject to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in Europe. And the standards that support that directive are the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, known as ESRS. So many companies might choose to or be required to apply both the European standards and the ISSB standards. So the two organisations, the European Standard Setter and the IFRS Foundation, are conscious of this, and they're working together to achieve as much interoperability between their standards as possible. So you'll see a link at the bottom of the document, and Fiona, thank you for providing the link in the chat as well, to another mapping document that's been done to show the high degree of alignment between these two organisations' disclosure requirements on climate-related disclosures. So that joint guidance is very helpful if you're subject to or wish to apply both types of standards. Now, somebody asked earlier about the application of integrated reporting when applying the ISSB standards. Now, the IFRS Foundation was one of the organisations that had been consolidated into the IFRS Foundation, and therefore the integrated reporting's work informed the development of the ISSB standards and also still exists as a complementary tool to reporting with the ISSB standards. So you can see a little thumbnail of a document that has been produced to show how to transition from integrated reporting and use all that rich knowledge to support your disclosures according to ISSB standards. So in particular, the integrated reporting framework, with its focus on value creation, supports this more holistic view of the value creation process and how value is created over time. Again, it was developed, the integrated reporting framework, to serve investor needs. So there's a great deal of consistency between what the integrated reporting framework asked and what the ISSB standards say. Of course, probably the most important thing is that integrated reporting is underpinned by integrated thinking that can enhance the quality of a company's governance and help with that value creation storytelling. So there are other tools that have been produced that are on the IFRS website. These are dedicated FAQs, a mapping tool, and this Getting Started guide to using integrated reporting to support disclosure to ISSB standards. So let's have a look now at another Zoom poll, and I think you can just select one answer here. So when considering your disclosure objectives, should you take account of the ISSB standards only, ISSB standards and regulatory requirements, just regulatory requirements, or the ISSB standards, regulatory requirements, and the other sources of guidance to the extent necessary and appropriate that we've just been talking about. And of course, there'll be other sources as well. Lots of you participating very quickly here, and I can see that, of course, you know the answer. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. You're quite right that in considering your company's own disclosure objectives and approach, you can consider the ISSB standards. You must, of course, take account of regulatory requirements and any other sources of guidance that help you to develop your disclosures in a complete and faithful way. So well done to all of you. It's time to hand back to Fiona now, who's going to take us through a summary of Module 2.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Lois. That's brilliant. As you say, that brings us to the wrap up now on our second module. So we will, apologies, we'll take a minute now to remind ourselves what we've learned so far. So we reviewed all of the 4 content areas of the ISSB standards. So that's governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. But an important thing to remember is that these don't operate in silos. We saw in our examples that despite having 4 separate categories of disclosure, of course, they are all connected. We also discussed how your disclosure might need to go beyond the requirements of S1 and S2, for example, to meet different stakeholder needs, to meet regulatory requirements in your jurisdiction, or to meet industry standards. And what's important to remember when you're doing this is that the ISSB standards have been purposely developed to act as a baseline. And the building blocks approach allows report preparers to add additional disclosures on top, if you have voluntary or other requirements to follow. But in doing so, you have to also be careful not to obscure the requirements of S1 and S2, of course, and keep that focus on material information. Okay, so to wrap up our module, we'll be going back to another exercise in Menti, which I've shared the link to in the chat as well, but it should be at the same link as you had before. So our next question here is at the end of our Align module and thinking about what the tools are that you can now practically really start to use to help you in this gap analysis. So as we said, you're going to want to conduct that gap analysis to understand what areas you really need to focus on addressing to align to the standards. And so we've talked about some of these tools already, but we want you to think a bit about what support options there might be for you. What might you be able to draw upon in terms of resources, capacity, toolkits, etc. So let's have a go and see what you think and see if you can also share with us some ideas perhaps that we might not have thought of. So I will reshare the Menti screen now. Lois, if you wouldn't mind just reposting the Menti link as well in the chat, just because it's a few messages up, but it should be there as well for people to see again, hopefully. Thanks, Lois. And I'll just show the QR code on the screen as well, just in case anyone needs that to access as well. I'll give everyone a second just to have a think about what are those real tools that you can use to help you here with that gap analysis. So I see a few responses coming in already, which is brilliant. So we've got the NRSF, of course, in Malaysia and other authoritative guidelines issued by reputable bodies. Absolutely. Making sure that you're paying close attention to those regulatory requirements in Malaysia, no doubt, is a very good way to go about this. CDP reporting, yes, exactly. So although the CDP requirements may go a little bit beyond what is material to your organization in some regards, it represents potentially a really complete data set and set of information that you can use to help you here. So definitely a good idea if you've already been doing CDP reporting. So we've got tools from the regulators. Yes, exactly. And I think we'll talk a little bit more from the SIDC perspective later on some support offerings that they have for you there. We've got the IFRS standards themselves, of course, and their industry checklists, definitely. And as we've talked about, the TCFD and GRI mapping tools will really help there as well. See if it'll let me scroll. It seems to have frozen a second there. Let's see if, there we go. I can scroll if I take it out of the screen. So we have SASB as well and sample disclosures from other companies. Yeah, exactly. So looking at what your peer companies, maybe in your region or in your sector in other regions of the world are doing will also be useful. Looking at the interoperability documents. Now, there we go, it's scrolling now. Looking at IFC's benchmarking tools. Yes, exactly. I think that would be definitely helpful. And the whole suite of resources they offer beyond the balance sheet, which Kate mentioned in her presentation earlier, and we'll share with you again at the end. Working with experienced ESG guidance and advisory firms who have experience on the standards. Yes, exactly. I think thinking about potentially external advisory support and getting that on board to support your program will be a good thing to think about at this stage in the process. So then we've also got lots of references to the standards. Perhaps stakeholder engagement as well. Yes, that's a good point. So particularly for your financial report users, so particularly your investors, if you have any existing avenues to gather feedback from your investors on your reporting, or maybe new ones, speaking to them and understanding their data needs and their concerns relating to sustainability risks and opportunities will be a very good place to inform your work. Great. See if I see anything pop up that we've not already talked about. I think we've got a lot of agreement, I guess, on what the right steps are and tools are, so that's excellent. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I think you've really highlighted a lot of what we would recommend there. We have some SSE training tools as well, which we've linked in the presentation and we can share with you again in the chat. We have a gap analysis checklist on the IFRS standards, which we can share. As you've mentioned, referring to the guidance of the S1 and S2 standards that sits alongside the standards can be very helpful, and the mapping documents. And in common with what was mentioned about CDP, of course, if you've already done TCFD reporting, then you have a very good starting point for the S2 standard. So making use of your TCFD reporting and perhaps just understanding any gaps relative to the S2 standard, using some of what we've talked about in this session regarding how that transition needs to be undertaken will hopefully be helpful. But perhaps if you're newer to reporting and you haven't done TCFD report before, there are lots of good examples out there of TCFD disclosures from other companies, so you can certainly use those. And we should, I think, within the coming months be starting to see our first IFRS ISSB aligned reports as well. So, you know, there'll be some more examples coming out in the current reporting year, I think, too, that will hopefully be helpful there. Lovely, thank you everyone for that. So I'll just stop sharing and switch back to my other presentation. Before I hand back over to Lois again, who'll be starting us on the next module. Thanks, Lois.
Yes, we're going to look at the next module now, which is called Implement. And this is more about processes and practices. So we've outlined the detailed content required for disclosure, but what many people ask is, well, thank you, but how do I do it? You know, what methods, techniques, practices, and processes are out there to help me? So that's what we're going to try to address here in 3 different units. The first is about identifying sustainability related risks and opportunities. Then we're going to look at some evaluation processes, and finally, how to integrate processes and practices into your existing suite of systems to cater for sustainability related risks and opportunities. Let's turn first to how to identify sustainability related risks and opportunities. So the sorts of things that you might ask are, well, which risks and opportunities shall we identify? And what the standard says is that when identifying sustainability related risks and opportunities, the company shall consider SASB standards. These are sector specific standards. But companies may consider other materials such as the CDSB framework application guidance, which covers climate, social issues, biodiversity, a sort of fuller range of sustainability topics, if you like. Companies could also use their industry practice guidance or materials of other investor-focused standard setters. If you decide what risks and opportunities you are going to report on, and bear in mind that IFRS S1 asks companies to provide material information on all sustainability related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's prospects, you're then going to be thinking about, well, which information should I report about those risks and opportunities? And again, the standards say, well, use the standard first and foremost. But of course, we only have a climate standard. So if for matters other than climate, you need information, you shall consider the SASB standards, but can also consider the other guidances that are listed here, the CDSB framework application guidance, industry practice, materials of investor focus, standard setters, and GRI standards and European sustainability reporting standards. Now, I should say that just very, very recently, the IFRS Foundation has published a comprehensive guide to help companies identify sustainability risks and opportunities and the material information to provide about them. So because that's very new, it's not on the slide, but I've just shared the link to you. And thank you very much, Fiona, for sharing the link as well. So we're talking in this session about how, this particular bit of our unit, about how to report. Bear in mind, the standard setter's job is to set standards that tell companies what to report. So the information on how to report is a bit more limited, but this new guide may well help you. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to look at an example. And this example is from a company called Yara, which is an international global crop nutrition company. And we're really looking at how they have identified and reported on their risks and opportunities. Right at the top of the screen, you'll see that the company has looked at global megatrends that could inform and influence Yara's own market megatrends. So they rely on things like the World Economic Forum annual risk report that Fiona mentioned earlier, and other sort of ways of understanding the global macro trends. Then what they've done is they've translated those trends into the specific risks and opportunities that apply particularly to their company as a global nutrition company. So on the risk side, they identify regulatory changes, consumer demand for sustainability, optimized fertilizer use, and the way in which that could present a risk because it could lead to lower fertilizer demand growth, which is one of their products. They also identify as a risk greater environmental costs and taxes, physical climate change risks to their operations and their customers, of course, very important for a global nutrition company. They also identify specific opportunities for their companies. And sometimes these are two sides of the same coin, as we say, because, for example, one of the things they note again is that optimal fertilizer use might actually present an opportunity because it can have that optimization can have a positive impact with the greater focus on soil health, water use, and biodiversity. So, but briefly, what we see in this example is a way of translating the macro trends into particular specific risks and opportunities presented by sustainability to Yara. We'll look at one more example quickly. This is an example from Nest's 2023 annual report. Nest is based in Finland, and it's a leading producer of sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel, and feedstock solutions for the chemical industry. So it's actually using science and technology to transform waste and other resources into renewable fuels and circular raw materials. So in this extract, which comes from the climate section of the company's annual report, it shows how this company has identified risks and opportunities in 3 different temperature scenarios. The net zero world is roughly equivalent to a 1.5 temperature outcome. Then they have the net zero UK and North America by 2050 scenario, broadly equivalent to 2 degrees, and the compromised climate target scenario are broadly equivalent to 2.5 to 3 degrees temperature outcome. So having described the scenarios that they're using in the first line to think about their risks and opportunities, they then describe the risks and opportunities in each of those scenarios. Now at the bottom, you'll see that they also tell us the indicative financial impact to the company of the risks and opportunities in each of those scenarios. Now, if we think of this example as a way of the company showing us the way they identify opportunities, you can see that the most positive indicative financial impact is in the net zero world. And perhaps we should expect that because this is a company that is, has sustainability at the heart of its business model, transforming waste and resources into renewable fuels and circular materials. So quite a different way from Yara of explaining their risks and opportunities. So although we now have some guidance, and the company will have its own processes, it can still be quite challenging to identify the risks and opportunities that you want to report on. And therefore, the standards, the ISSB standards, offer these proportionality mechanisms that we've already talked about. And these mechanisms are designed to ensure that the effort involved in responding to the requirements is proportional to the benefit. And therefore, the standards say that in applying specific requirements, including identification of risks and opportunities, a company is required to use all reasonable and supportable information available at the reporting date without undue cost and effort. What do we mean by this? Well, reasonable and supportable information is information that is specific to the company. So we saw this very much in the last two examples, didn't we? That takes account of the external environment, just what we saw from both companies, taking account of external scenarios or external megatrends. It includes information about past events, current conditions, and forecasts. So the past events and current conditions certainly will be known to the company. And in some cases, the proportionality mechanism is specified within the sustainability disclosure standard. So I think I'm handing back to you now, Fiona, to take us through the next section of this implement module.
Great, thanks, Lois. As you say, that moves us along to the evaluate side of implementation. So we've identified those risks and opportunities through the processes that Lois has just talked us through, and now the company will need to evaluate the financial effects of those risks and opportunities. And of course, this can be quite a daunting task when first getting started. So here we're going to briefly review a few of the key concepts that can hopefully help you to get started. So to help investors understand a company's resilience against climate risk, S2 requires a company to disclose information about the implications of climate change on its strategy and business model. It also asks for the company's financial and operational capacity to adjust or adapt over the short, medium, and long term. So, for example, you might test your company's resilience against new regulation to limit certain high emissions activities, or your company's ability to respond to changing crop yields due to more frequent heat waves. So to do this, you'll need to use climate scenarios which draw on science and analyse how these scenarios will lead to the company's incurring financial effects. And what's important to remember is that scenario analysis is not intended to be a prediction or forecast of the future. Rather, it's a tool for considering potential plausible pathways and to test your resilience to those possible future events. So it's not ascribing a particular likelihood to a certain future, but just considering what is possible that could happen and how you might respond to that. S2 doesn't specify which scenarios a company should use in analysis because those will really vary depending on your sector, depending on the risk type that you wish to assess, and of course, I think as we've shared in some of the question responses, the science and availability of tools in this space is evolving all the time. So it is a case of picking those tools and scenarios which are most applicable to your exercise. What S2 does, however, ask is that you use relevant scenarios and that you provide information to explain how and why you've selected those scenarios. And that also you disclose any of the relevant assumptions that underlie the scenarios used in your analysis. And S2 includes some guidance on how companies can determine its approach to scenario analysis. And that really ranges from a number of practices, from starting with qualitative scenario narratives, but moving over time perhaps to more complex statistical modelling, depending on the nature of the risks that your organisation faces and the sector you're in. You may need to obviously continue to evolve your understanding to better assess those material risks and opportunities. So overall, the requirement for ISSB standards here is that you use an approach that's commensurate with your company's circumstances and that uses all reasonable and supportable information available to you at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. So let's now have a little bit of a look at an example of how one organisation is approaching this. So here we have an example from Cemex, which is a Mexican multinational building materials company active in over 50 companies. So Cemex has used scenario analysis in its integrated report to assess its risks and opportunities against 3 different IEA or International Energy Agency scenarios. So on the left-hand side here, they've identified those different risks and opportunities. And then on the right-hand side, they set out the 3 different scenarios of stated policies, sustainable development, and net zero emissions by 2050. And they've then done an assessment of how they expect the probability and impact of their different risks and opportunities to potentially vary under those different scenarios. So you can see that actually under, for example, a net zero emissions or a sustainable development scenario, they expect to see more opportunities because more rapid decarbonisation is happening and there are more benefits that can be realised there. Whereas they expect perhaps to see higher physical risks in terms of both likelihood and impact under a stated policy scenario where it's a little bit more of a business as usual pathway. And what's good about this report as well is that alongside this disclosure, they also provide a summary that explains those assumptions that sit under each scenario, how they've used it, and kind of, what their underlying thinking is that's informed this assessment. So this is, just one example of an approach that could be taken here to getting started with this. So anticipating the materiality of future events can, of course, be very challenging. So to help with this determination, IFRS S1 asks that you consider a number of issues to help with your determination. So you could think of this list on the screen here as identifying all of the steps and information that you need to come to your judgment. So for example, the company should be considering all low probability but high impact events. It should be considering any uncertainties related to the company's future cash flows. And another important point here is the need to reassess this at each reporting period. So whilst it's recognised, of course, that there are inherently uncertainties relating to projections of futures, of course, it's expected that you continue to evaluate that and just be transparent about any uncertainties that may arise and how you're using this to inform your processes on an annual basis. Okay, great. Back over to you now, Lois, for Integrate.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, well, the good news about some of this disclosure is that although the standards are new, you will have many processes, systems, practices within your organization that could be used to help with your disclosure. They could be on governance, risk management, data quality, internal audit, a whole host of things that could help you or be developed or adapted to support your sustainability disclosure. So if you already have processes you know that could support your disclosure, you may want to ask the following questions to consider whether and to what extent they are suitable as they are, or whether they need some type of adaptation to make them more suitable for sustainability related disclosure, because we know that sustainability issues have their unique characteristics in terms of the time horizons over which they manifest and the uncertainties associated with them, and therefore some adjustment might be needed for that. So the other thing to think about as well is how you integrate sustainability related considerations into your processes. So these are the questions. What about a gap analysis to check for gaps in existing systems and processes? Think about the suitability and the prioritization criteria that pertain to your existing processes. as we said, are they suitable given the unique characteristics of sustainability risks and opportunities? Do we need different prioritization criteria or additional prioritization criteria for sustainability risks that take account not only of probability and likelihood, but also impact, vulnerability, and speed of onset? What about internal controls? Are they suitable to evaluate sustainability risks, or do they need some adaptations? Which contributors will you need from inside and outside the organization to support your processes and your disclosures? So which departments could be involved? Health and safety, risk, finance, sustainability, company secretarial, which departments need to be involved, and what expertise do they have to contribute? And do we need external expertise to help? What are the interconnections between the various internal and external factors that determine the way in which you prepare your disclosures and manage your processes? And how are they to be understood and integrated into your process setting? So we saw some examples earlier, for example, of where the sort of global decarbonisation goals affect a company's own decarbonisation strategy, and then that needs to be connected with their investment decision making. In your processes, how will you deal with uncertainties? There are bound to be uncertainties associated with your processing and disclosure, and therefore, what will be the approach to them? And finally, what resources are in place or need to be applied for to adapt or develop new processes and systems? Do you need to go through a change management process or apply for new budget? What will be the need for resources and where will they come from? So all of these things relevant when considering how to adapt or implement new processes. But the other thing you can do is to develop a disclosure plan. So a disclosure plan is a standalone strategy or part of a wider disclosure strategy that helps you to manage all these different elements of your disclosure and actually forms the basis for your homework. So we're recommending as your homework that you prepare a disclosure plan. Why would you do this? Well, lots of the questions that we've seen that come from disclosure standards ask, what is your strategy, company? What are your entities' risks and opportunities? What are the metrics and targets that you set? So this disclosure plan enables you to take control of your narrative in the sense that you conform with all of the requirements, but you make them your own. You're not just doing some sort of generalized disclosure, as we saw in some of the examples. You're making your own narrative from the disclosure requirements whilst conforming with them comprehensively. The disclosure plan also helps to support the internal collaboration we just talked about, so that you know who's going to be involved in disclosure, how they'll share knowledge, how you can manage cross-functional teamwork, and even looking at how systems operate together to produce the information you need. Now, most importantly, I think the disclosure plan is a reference point and audit trail that is like a permanent record of how your disclosures are prepared, who's involved, which systems were used, how and where judgments have been made by your governing body and management and how they've been applied. So all of using a disclosure plan can help you keep a permanent record of all of these things, including how data is sourced, how you use systems and controls, whether you've got or have to or want to get assurance for some or all of your disclosures, and very importantly, what are the sign-off procedures and who does the sign-off and what information do they need to support them to sign off your sustainability related disclosures prepared in accordance with the ISSB standards. We're going to have a look at a little example, very, very brief example. There are some emerging examples of how companies report their disclosure plans through. Sometimes they call them a data book that really tells you the whole basis on which the disclosures have been prepared. This example is from Hammerson's 2022 ESG data book. Hammerson's a British property developer. And very briefly, what they're doing here is telling us the basis on which their report has been prepared. So we can see in this example the period covered, the types of standards that have been used, the methodologies that were used, and how the information has been consolidated, meaning whether it's at group level or at individual subsidiary level, usually at group level. So it tells us the approach and scope for data collection, verification, piecing everything together, and it's a very helpful contextual piece of information to understand how the company has prepared the report. And it's great if you can start preparing your disclosure plan before you get into preparing the report, so you have all these pieces in place by the time that you begin. Let's do a Zoom poll to see what we think about the disclosure plan. And the question is very simply, is a disclosure plan required by the IFRS sustainability disclosure plans? The standards, sorry. Answers, yes, you must disclose your plan, or no, but it's a very helpful tool. Well, we have a good level of participation now. I'm going to share end the poll and share the results with you here. This is a very typical pattern of answers that we see with all of the wonderful people that we train. There's a kind of a split opinion here, but actually with this audience, brilliant, you got the answer right. No, 53% of you were right. There is nothing in the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards that says you must have a disclosure plan and you must disclose details of it. It's not required. We just suggest it as your homework for all of the reasons that I gave, because it is a very helpful tool. So no, you don't need it, but it is a very helpful tool. So I hope that helps understand why we are suggesting the disclosure plan as your homework. We've got one more poll to do before we go to the Module 3 summary. And I think you're going to know the answer to this. A disclosure plan can help a company to do which things? So you can select all that apply, take control of its narrative within its general purpose financial reports, support collaboration and knowledge sharing, act as a reference point, or skip full disclosure as prescribed by the ISSB. I can see, thank you so much for responding so quickly. I can see you all know the answer to this. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Of course, it's the first three things. Having a disclosure plan is not an excuse to skip full disclosure as prescribed by the ISSB. So well done to all of you. And Fiona's now going to take us through a summary of Module 3.
Thanks, Lois. Great. So that brings us to the end of our third of 4 modules. So we're doing well, everyone. Well done for staying with us so far. So just to come back to a few of those things that we talked about in this module. So firstly, of course, connections. In the last module, we wrapped up by highlighting the importance of connections between those 4 different content areas of disclosure. And then in this module, we learned that there are many connections as well between a company and its external and internal environment. And these connections are what we really need to focus on to identify key risks and opportunities. The second thing that we discussed in this module was related to evaluating those risks and opportunities. And a key component of that evaluation is consistency in your assumptions. So using scenario analysis can be a very helpful tool, as it helps you to keep track of those assumptions and disclose them in a consistent way. And if you're new to scenario analysis, we hope that a few of the resources that have been shared will be helpful for getting started. Thanks to participants for discussing the WBCSD scenarios in the chat. And in the question responses, I also gave a few options from the World Bank and the IEA as well that may help you there. So finally, as we've seen, even if some of this data isn't data that you're already disclosing, it possibly is something that you're already collecting in the business for other reasons. Or it might be that while it's new data, you have appropriate practices or places in place that would allow you to collect it. So I think what's really important to try as much as you can is not to start from scratch here, and to try and build on your existing processes and data that you have in the business to support you in getting moving along with this. Okay, so that brings us to our third exercise, which we're going to be looking at around those existing systems and processes. So taking a little moment really to reflect on what might you already have at your disposal in your organization that could help you to collect data and to manage it. So what are those different sources you may be able to draw upon for your sustainability related metrics? So I will go back to Menti now. I've shared the link just before in the chat with you as well, so that should be just there for you, and then we will open that up and see your responses coming through. Okay, I'll just give everyone a second to have a think on that question, and then we'll start having a little look at the answers. See some of you coming back on this already, so that's great. So firstly, we have around integrating climate risks into your risk appetite in the financial sector by detailed carbon intensive sectors. Sure. So we talked a little bit in some of the Q&A responses as well about ways that you might adapt your enterprise risk process. So yeah, considering how it reflects in your overall risk appetite is definitely important. I think we're talking here from the perspective of someone as a financial firm lending to the carbon intensive sector or investing in it. So yeah, I think that's very important to consider how those climate risks factor in there. So we have accounting information systems. Yeah, so using those existing accounting systems that you have and seeing if you can adapt those to enable you to collect ESG information, or indeed, maybe you already are collecting some ESG information through those. And of course, those accounting systems will be built in a really robust way with the right controls, workflows, audit trail, etc., that will support you in having good quality information that would be ready for assurance as well. So we have looking at your risk registers. Yes, absolutely. So likely there will already be relevant information there. It may not be badged as an ESG or sustainability risk, but of course, as we talked about, there's a lot of interconnection here. So many of those risk types that you're already assessing through your ERM process will be heavily connected to what we're talking about here. So we have using your existing accounting systems again, and maybe having an EMS, or I think an environmental management system there. So yes, exactly, you may have already implemented something in that respect. And again, seeing if you could perhaps broaden out that tool to support collecting social information perhaps as well, or using what you're collecting in it for reporting. Got a few different data types mentioned here. I'll just keep scrolling so we can see a few more. Information gathering through climate risk assessment workshops with info owners. Yeah, so there may be some new information that you need to gather, absolutely. So thinking about the best routes to get that, and a workshop potentially could be very helpful, at least to map what you already know and understand where the gaps are and what sources you might be able to go to help you there. Okay, so ISO risk registers, yes, definitely. So those will help as well. Yeah, maybe you have criteria within supplier assessments. So maybe you're already requiring that your suppliers provide you with certain disclosures on environment and social already in your due diligence. So definitely that will be very helpful. Stakeholder surveys as well, perhaps meeting minutes, integrated data template, mapping it in. Lots of good ideas. So Internet of Things enabled devices. So yeah, I think for maybe energy performance, if I'm not mistaken, that could be a good way to connect in and see if you can collect things in real time as well. Possibly more to that than I am aware of as well that may help. A materiality assessment, yes, absolutely. So if you already have a materiality assessment that you've done in the past, that will be a very useful starting point here. Just making sure that that is aligned to that investor audience that we've talked about, and that supports you in that regard. Looking at other sustainability reports using carbon calculators, using data from accounting and audit, or manufacturing data. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of your operational performance information, as you say, may connect well to topics such as circular economy. Great. Loads of really good ideas here. Thank you very much for sharing all of these, everyone. So I think lots of good concepts here around really, making use of those existing sources that you have, working with what you've already got. Of course, some of the challenges can be that if this actually sits in a lot of different systems, you need to understand and map out where it all lives and how it connects together. So getting a good overview of that will be very important, and kind of building clarity so that you can see who is responsible for what data, where it lives. Excellent. I think we've covered most of these points, but yeah, as we say here, like maybe looking at your business KPIs as well, seeing if those could be extended to include more sustainability information will certainly be a good way to drive focus on these issues. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. So I will switch back screens now so that we can go to the next section, which Robert will be taking us through. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Yes, indeed, we're moving to the next module, module 4 on a communication, and it's about which focuses on the when and where of this disclosure of sustainability-related information. And within this module, we have 3 sections. And about the location and timing, about the efficiency and the confidence and of the reporting. And we'll start with the location and information on where disclosure should appear. But before we dive into the specific requirements, let's think about sustainability disclosures in the context on the complete package that is useful to investors. So if we're looking on the left-hand side and you're looking at the investors focused reporting requirements, investors already have access to company financial statements, and ISSB standards are designed to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities that complement the financial statements. These all come together in a reporting package that we call the general purpose financial report. And the requirements in the ISSB standards about what information to report are based on existing sustainability reporting regimes focused on investor information needs and on aspects of financial accounting standards. And on the other hand, GRI standards expand on sustainability metrics relevant to broader societal concerns. So ISSB and GRI reporting standards share some content requirements, for example, what to report, but the ISSB standards are focused on investors' information needs and decision-making, reflecting the mission of the IFRS Foundation to bring transparency, accountability, and efficiency to capital markets. Both organizations take different approaches to defining materiality, but they are not competing. The GRI approach is set and understood among sustainability practitioners, whereas the IFRS approach is familiar to accountants and relies heavily on management judgment, aligning with existing corporate risk management processes. So together, these frameworks enable companies to meet the growing demand for transparent, consistent information across financial and non-financial dimensions, aligning both investor priorities and broader societal expectations. And now moving to the next section, I will discuss and recap again the definition and the concept of material information. So as we just noted, materiality has different definitions for different reporting standards and audiences. In identifying material information to be disclosed, a company will first need to identify the sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect its prospects. Once the company has identified those risks and opportunities, it can determine what information to provide about those risks and opportunities. This is where our materiality definition comes into play. The definition of material information used as one is based on and aligned with definition found in the IFRS accounting standards. It is information that, if omitted, misstated, or obscured by other information, could reasonably be expected to influence investor decisions. In other words, ISSB standards seek to identify disclosure of key information that matters to investors. And as is stated as one, the entity determines what constitutes a sustainability-related risk and opportunity based on its facts and circumstances. And entities already often have well-established processes for identifying, assessing, and reporting sustainability-related risks and opportunities as part of the management of their businesses. Great. And then regarding the disclosing of material information, investors have asked for disclosure of material information, and ISSB standards have been designed to help you gather to disclose it. However, this means that a company does not need to disclose information that is not material, even if the ISSB standards include it as a specific requirement. So a couple of things to remember here. One must ensure that material information is clearly identifiable and that you use plain language. You also should make sure that information is not scattered across your disclosure, and include any additional non-material disclosures if required by regulators, but ensure it is clearly identified as such. And the IFRS has recently released a further education material providing guidance for companies on identifying and disclosing material information on sustainability-related risks and opportunities, which we encourage you to look for further detail. And Fiona will put the link to this document published recently by IFRS. All right, and I'll be starting another Zoom poll. Unless then, so the Zoom poll is, unless it has been determined that if particular values being exemplified are expected to have a financial effect on the company, this may not be the information that is necessary. So the Zoom poll is, then we have three options. So information should be disclosed in the annual report when applying ISSB standards if omitting information could reasonably be expected to influence investors' decisions. B, it could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flows. C, it exemplifies the value of the leadership team. And great. Yeah, you're getting this very right. Indeed, the right answers are A and B. So so the material information is not about the values of the leadership team. So the answer C is incorrect. A and B are the correct ones. All right. Thank you for participating in this in this poll, and then we are moving then to the key concept here in this section. So where to report for the ISSB. So disclosure under the ISSB standards has to accompany the financial statements and be part of the same general purpose financial reporting package. But as one does not say where in the reporting package the information shall be provided. This is designed to allow jurisdiction-specific requirements on the location of reporting. The most important factor to consider here is to ensure that sustainability disclosures are provided as a part of the same reporting package as the company financial statements. Sustainability disclosure must be provided also at the same time as the related financial statements cover the same reporting period and be authorized by the same body or individual authorizing financial statements. Research by WBCSD on the state of the integrated reporting shows that nearly 2/3 of companies continue to put sustainability information in standalone report. And this is not what is prescribed by the ISSB. But because they need to be included in a general purpose financial report, so that suggests that there's a way to improve, and many companies have some way to go to get to their internal processes and disclosures plans aligned. And in the next section, we'll have the example how this can be applied in practice. Over to you, Lois.
Thanks, Robert. This is an example from Ayala, which is a Philippines-based conglomerate. It's got lots of different activities in property development, banks, healthcare, technology, really a big complex company. So I know many of you are interested in integrated reporting, and this is an extract from Ayala's integrated report. And what they're doing here is that they're showing a sort of an overview of their reporting package. Robert's just been talking about where to report, and in this snapshot, which is based on the integrated reporting model of capitals going into the business as inputs to create value, the value creation mechanism represented in the dark blue box, and the value generated at the end. We see that there are arrows pointing to each of these parts of the single snapshot that tell us on which page we can find further information about the strategy, the business model, the ESG priorities, and so on. So what we have here is a navigation tool, if you like, that helps us understand how information is reported throughout the integrated report. Back to you, Robert.
Perfect, thank you, Alois. Yeah, and then we'll be now moving to the next important feature. It's about technology in the disclosure and reporting. So technology is an emerging consideration for disclosures, and increasingly corporate reporting is moving from PDF reports towards information on web pages with structured data sets, such as those databases offered by stock exchanges. The IFRS Foundation has created the ISSB taxonomy, which reflects the requirements and accompanying materials of the ISSB standards. So the taxonomy itself does not introduce a new requirement. A digital taxonomy provides the common elements or tags needed to make your sustainability disclosure machine readable. This makes it easier to take large data sets like information from an entire industry and bring them all together to analyze them. And digital reporting has a number of benefits. It makes the reported information easier for analysis. Data is structured and the same across businesses in a machine-readable format. Tagging information potentially allows for automated checks for quality and consistency. And tags can have labels and descriptions in multiple languages. So if you report your quantity data in one language, someone speaking another language can also understand what it means. And now I'll be moving to the next section within this module about the efficiency and how to communicate efficiently and effectively. So following the discussion on location and timing, let's move to this section. We added this to training because a common comment we find from companies is that there is a growing reporting burden. And what we hope to highlight is that when done correctly, efficiencies can be made to reduce that burden. So first of all, it's important to understand what effective communication looks like and what is required. Often companies think that if they just put all the information they have into a report, then everyone will be satisfied. But this would be against the core concepts in particular for presentation. For example, it could be helpful to ask the questions: is the information clear and concise? And by clear, we mean the fact whether the information is clear might depend on the nature of the information. For example, whether it could be clear to present information in tables, graphs, diagrams, plus accompanying text. And to be concise, disclosures need to avoid boilerplate information, unnecessary duplication of information, and to use a clear language. So some preparers watching today might be thinking to themselves that they still don't see what is all the fuss about. Perhaps their experience focuses on standalone sustainability reports, or they haven't had much interaction with external audit. So to the accountants watching, I would say be kind to your colleagues, help them understand the difference in rigors that's required in data collection, oversight, sign-off, etc. for the financial statements. This means, for example, Disclosures include comparative information and are to be restated as necessary. Disclosures avoid unnecessary duplication and cross-reference as required. Information has to be material, be connected, and aggregated or disaggregated as appropriately. And one of the things we mentioned is cross-referencing. So as you may have noticed, there may appear to be some overlap in the disclosure topics. For example, you might have the same governance approach for all sustainability issues. And rather than duplicate information, you can use cross-referencing to enhance efficiency of the disclosures. So cross-referencing to other reports is permitted, as long as the other report is available on the same terms at the same time as the sustainability disclosures. The cross-reference information is assumed to become part of the reporting package. So cross-referencing shall be applied consistently and transparently. It shall not result in the information becoming more difficult to understand. And to visualize this, how that can be, again, work in practice, we have an example, and Lois will present it to you.
Yes, thanks, Robert. This is an example from a company called CRH, which is a manufacturer and supplier of a wide range of products for the construction industry. It's based in Ireland. Now, this example is about the way in which the company has considered climate-related risks and their targets for emissions reductions, the effect that has on their financial statements. And some of you have asked questions about this. So it's a pretty good example to illustrate how this particular company has approached it. Now, bear in mind that they prepared this example in their 2022 annual report, and there is currently a consultation out by the IFRS Foundation about the influence of climate change-related uncertainties on the financial statements. So have a look at the consultation document, because it does include examples, one of which is quite like this one from CRH. So what have we got here? At the top of the page, the company tells us that the disclosure is about the impact of climate change and emissions reductions targets on the financial statements. They tell us where we can find details of the risks they're considering. They're in their TCFD disclosures. And in the middle of the screenshot here, we can see the line items that the company has considered. So they're thinking about, do these risks, these climate risks, and do our targets affect impairment, testing of goodwill, property, plant, and equipment? Do they affect the useful lives of assets? Do they affect provisions for liabilities, our inventories, or our retirement benefit obligations? They cross-reference to where the line items are and the line items where they've considered whether the targets affect those financial statement line items. Now, what they conclude at the bottom of the page is that they tell us that there is no material impact on the financial statement as a result of those risks. They've considered this using the company's usual accounting policies, estimates, and underlying assumptions. And as we can see, they've tested particular things. So even though there are no material impacts, the company has chosen to make this disclosure, telling us what they've considered, why, and what the outcome is, i.e. no material impact. And that's because it's useful for investors to know that the company has at least considered the impact of these risks. Within the construction industry, perhaps the investors suppose that there might be some effect. And what this disclosure tells them is, we've considered it, there's no material impact. So back to you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Yeah, and in the next section, we'll be talking then about how to make their enable the, sorry, I'm just gonna, what are the mechanisms which can help us to support the adoption. And we've started to apply a number of mechanisms to support preparers to get started with the ISSB standards. And one simple thing put in place was to adopt well-known terminology and concepts familiar to preparers, borrowing from the ISSB, for example. And many requirements in S1 and S2 are to be applied proportionally, recognizing companies will have a range of capabilities and preparedness on these issues. For example, qualitative scenario analysis are permitted, and you will see the phrase all reasonable and supportable information at the reporting date without undue cost or effort, or consumerate with skills, capabilities, and resources in a number of places. Additionally, there are reliefs for the first year of application, and they've been introduced, and these include companies being able to limit disclosure to climate in year 1 and begin reporting on their other sustainability-related risks and opportunities in year 2. Companies being able to provide annual sustainability-related financial disclosures with their next half-year reporting rather than at the same time as the financial statements. Additionally, companies not needing to provide disclosures about Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions apply the Greenhouse Gas Protocol corporate standards to measure emissions if they are already using a different measurement approach, or provide comparative information in their first year of reporting using S1 or S2. Another relief allows companies to include greenhouse gas emissions information obtained from companies in the value chain with a different reporting cycle. So we've already mentioned a number of other sources of guidance and resources, including SASB standards, CDSB framework application guidance, among many others. So these reliefs are designed to enable companies to put in place reporting practices and structures to provide high quality decision useful information. All right, and now we then moving to the next Zoom poll. So the information disclosed in accordance with the ISSB standards should be, and they have 4 options: decision useful, A, decision useful, B, material, C, misleading, and D, comparable. And I'm pretty sure by now this should be pretty obvious to every one of you. And indeed, that's the case. So the right answers are A, B, and D. And of course, the information disclosed should not be misleading. So answer C is incorrect. And then moving to the next one. And this time, the question is, information is decision useful if it is A, relevant and faithfully represent what it purports to represent, B, comparable, C, verifiable, D, timely, E, understandable. So what are the features of the decision useful information? And again, seems like you have a good understanding of the concept of the decision useful information, because indeed all the answers are correct. Perfect. So great answers here. Moving to the last section of this module about confidence. And about maximizing confidence in disclosed information. And in this section, we will look how to ensure that users of financial reports have confidence in the data you are disclosing, as trust is an essential component of sustainability-related disclosures, and increasingly so with growing concern over greenwashing. So again, we'll be talking. We mentioned before comparative information and the importance of using comparative information. So that's an important trust builder, that it's showing data and trends over time, and this is why ISSB standards asks for comparatives. Comparative information provides context, helps to indicate progress, and underpins strategy and risk management. And metrics disclosed by company might be redefined or replaced over time, or the company might change its method of estimating a metric. So in this situation, it is important for the company to revise the comparatives to enable investors to compare and analyze current period figures with the relevant prior period figures. Occasionally, a company's sustainability disclosures might contain material errors. In these situations, the company is required to restate these errors in the comparatives provided. So revisions or restatements are necessary only when there is a risk that the material information being omitted, misstated, or obscured as a result of not revising or restating the comparatives. Information can be qualitative and quantitative. So companies sometimes express concern with sharing information they deem to be sensitive, or that if shared could deplete their competitive advantage. So the ISSB standards relieve a company from disclosing information about sustainability-related opportunity if that information is commercially sensitive. If this is a concern you have, there's a further detail you can read in the handout. So now briefly, some things to remember. Walk through the list. So about the information and so what it should be the qualitative elements of the information, about the connections, and about the key features of the disclosures. You can find in the handout slide deck an additional slide in this section with reminders on how to report effectively, and I highly recommend reviewing that. Moving over to you, Fiona, on the summary of this module.
Great, thank you so much for that, Robert. And I see we've had lots of late-stage technical questions as well, so appreciate your help in the Q&A to see if we can respond to those. So we'll do our best to get back to everyone, but we can also follow up. Feel free to follow up with us after the session at the contact details we'll share at the end if your question isn't answered, just to cover that. So we're going to be just wrapping up now, as I said, on our final module, before we come to a few closing remarks and the SIDC as well, who'll be giving us a bit of an overview on their side. So I'll rattle through this a bit quickly just to make sure we've got plenty of time for that. So firstly, obviously, we've talked here around where to report the information. And what was important here was the audience, or who you're reporting to. So let's be clear from the start that the primary user of this information is investors, and that will really help us to ensure that we're providing the right information to their needs. We then talked about efficiency, and I think the key takeaway here that we'd like to give you is that less is more wherever possible. So we're not intending to overload the users of information here with information, because actually that could be harmful and obscure what's material. So trying to be as concise and as focused on materiality as you can in your reporting will hopefully be helpful here. And of course, that's the fundamental purpose of these standards. And finally, we talked about report user confidence, especially in that current climate of greenwashing and accusations perhaps of misleading statements from companies. What, of course, you want to do is ensure that your data is not only accurate, but that it's presented in a transparent and balanced way that builds trust. And so we hope that the disclosure plan that we've worked through with you in these exercises, and you'll be able to take away to build upon in the homework assignment, will help you to really build out that estimations and approach further. Okay, so that wraps up our summary. We'll now be, move too fast. Our next section is a brief presentation from the SIDC team on their sustainability programme. So we have Qayyum Ghazali, who's joined us to cover off this segment. So thanks very much, Qayyum. So I hope that you have access to now share your screen with us, but I'll just let you check that and let me know if you need any assistance there.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Let me try to share my screen.
I'll just stop sharing mine as well in case that helps.
Okay, hi.
Great.
Hi, everyone. I would like to express our gratitude from SIDC. My name is Abdul Qayyum, the manager from Client Coverage and Sales Department. I would like to say thank you for having us today, especially our collaboration partners today from SSC, Partner Exchanges, IFC, and our honored experts today, especially from IFRS and SSC. And today we will talk about maybe 5 minutes or less on our Certified Capital Market Professional Sustainable and Responsible Investment at CCMP SRI, which is one of our professional certification offered by SIDC under the purview of Securities Commission Malaysia and Bursa Malaysia. So to start with, CCMP SRI is an award-winning certification. We have won the Initiative Award Malaysia for Sustainable Investment. We call it ESG Business Awards this year, 2024. And the reason being why we have developed this program, because through the extensive research for more than 5 years, we have benchmarked and did our consultations with more than 74 industry experts to come up with this program. This program is truly supported by the Capital Market Development Fund, CMDF. The CCMP SRI is the Malaysia's first comprehensive certification for sustainable and responsible investment, which supported the Malaysia's sustainability agenda, which we are focusing towards green initiative for sustainable finance. Okay, so these are the learning outcomes of the program. We will share the full details of this program once we have provided you with the QR code. But more or less, this CCMP SRI program, certification program, consists of about 3 months of learning journey, where we will start with the induction. Induction, normally we will do the SDG games, okay, maybe half a day. And then we will continue with the e-learning modules. You can have the access of our e-learning modules when you start to register until the last day before you enroll for the assessment. Okay, the learning journey is quite extensive and dynamic, where we will continue after the e-learning, which you can always access throughout our LMS learning module portal. We will continue with our workshop. Normally, we will just take a day in your week for conducting this workshop, and we will continue with the collaborative learning. This collaborative learning, we will assemble all the multiple experts from different industries, especially people who are involving in ESG and SRI and sustainability, to be exact, to share their ideas and their thoughts on what are their approaches in handling any case studies that we will provide them on these 2 days of collaborative learning sessions. So these 2 collaborative learning sessions will carry 40% of your total carry marks, and upon the completion of assessment, there will be another 20% that you must pass for you to be considered as a passing graduate of CCMP SRI. The highlight of this program, when you have completed the assessment and the collaborative learning, the graduation ceremony will be hosted at the building of Securities Commission Malaysia. If you need the graduation ceremony video for our latest intakes for 2024, we are more than happy to provide you with the video soon. You can always reach out to us for more information. Okay, so now I will leave you to scan your QR code to get further information. There will be an online form that you have to fill out to put your details there. We need to know your designation, your company, and maybe your organization and the industry that you are currently in for us to assist you further. Okay, so I hope this helps you a lot in understanding the Malaysia's first certification on ESG and SRI, which we are still actively promoting today to get to provide more awareness, especially for Malaysian capital market enthusiasts and ESG and sustainability experts and people who are championing sustainability in their daily life. So that's all from me. I'm going to give the floor back to Fiona. Thank you for having
Thank you so much, Graham, for that. That's super helpful, I'm sure, for everyone attending today, just to hear a little bit more about what you're doing at SIDC to support them. So a couple of final slides just to wrap us up here as we're coming to the end of the session. So I will just step back. I won't go back into Menti, but just to share with you that at the link that we have shared in the chat, there's a final question for you to answer for us, just letting us know how you are feeling against those learning objectives that we set out at the start of the session. And I can see that many of you have responded to indicate a little bit higher along that comfort curve. So that's brilliant. So I'll leave you to respond to that in the background, but please do so. So this is kind of coming now to the end, of course, of our interactive time together, but we know that this is just the beginning of the journey in terms of your sustainability reporting and adoption of the standards. So we wanted to review with you the homework assignment, which you can find on the event page for today's session, which we've shared with you in the chat box a few times now. So on this event page, you'll find a download of the homework assignment. It follows the same structure as we've worked through in the Menti exercises today. It takes you really through considering those 4 key steps of prepare, align, implement, and communicate. So we really recommend as a voluntary optional exercise for you to take that away to build out your learning and build out that disclosure plan and work with your colleagues on that. So please take a look at that. A few resource hubs that we've mentioned. Obviously, we've talked about loads of resources today, and there's a few repositories where you can go to find a lot of these. Firstly is the IFRS Knowledge Hub, which collates all of the IFRS's work and many related bodies as well to support you on those particular individual topics. And then, of course, the standards themselves are an important source to refer back to at all times. From the IFC's team, we have the whole suite of resources with the Beyond the Balance Sheet set of work, which aims to really focus on all sorts of areas around corporate governance, sustainability, and governance, etc. So please take a look there. And finally, the SSE's toolkit as well, which we shared with you before and just resharing here again, is a great place to go for some further insights in these areas as well. And so, as I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, perhaps after quite a long session, we are coming to the end. So a big thank you for everyone who stuck with us throughout this full 3.5 hours of training. We know that this is a long time, there's a lot to learn, so we're really appreciative of that. So you'll be able to get a completion certificate for taking part with us today if you follow the link, which is now being shared with you in the chat by Lois. Thanks, Lois. If you fill out the feedback survey at that link, that will allow you to receive your certificate. We will also be sending this via email within the next 24 hours, so please keep out for an email from Zoom, which will share this link as well. But if you fill out the feedback survey, you'll receive your certificate in approximately 5 working days. So before you email us, please do give time to receive that email from Zoom and for us to send the certificate, but we aim to do so very soon. And finally, just to say some thanks from our side. So a big thank you to all of the SSE's supporters and of course to the SIDC for hosting today's session. We so appreciate their time to bring us all together. And of course to the IFRS team, to Bella and Robert in particular, and Jarlath for joining us in person today, to IFC and to Kate in particular as well on that side. And of course, a massive thank you to all of you for joining us and participating so enthusiastically and collaborating in today's session. We really appreciate that. So we'll close out today's session there, but a big thank you again, everyone, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everyone. Oh, and sorry, I have seen a link saying that the feedback link is not working there. We'll check on that and we will be sending it out via email to you as well. So as I said, please look out for that email. But thanks a lot, everyone. All the best. Bye.